The billionaire CEO was crying behind frosted glass walls when Ethan discovered her secret. What happened next that snowy Boston night would shatter everything they thought they knew about love, power, and the masks we wear to survive. A fake relationship, a family wedding, and one impossible choice that would change two broken hearts forever. Welcome to a story of unexpected connection in the coldest winter night. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city name in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll discover why sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop pretending to be unbreakable. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Sterling Technologies hummed their lonely song through the empty corridors of the 42nd floor. Outside, Boston was disappearing beneath a violent curtain of snow, the kind of storm that shut down highways and sent everyone scrambling for shelter hours ago. The weather reports had been screaming warnings since noon, but Ethan Cole barely noticed. For the first time in 8 months, he had stayed late at the office, and the silence felt almost sacred. Ethan sat at his desk in the financial analysis department, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Spreadsheets glowed on dual monitors before him, numbers that had demanded his attention all week finally making sense in the quiet. At 32, he had become a master of efficiency, of cramming 45 hours of work into 35 so he could race home to the small Brighton apartment where his daughter waited. But tonight was different. Tonight, 8-year-old Maya was at her best friend Sophie's house for a sleepover, giggling over movies and pizza while he, for once, could breathe without watching the clock. He had almost forgotten what this felt like. The luxury of focusing on something for more than 20 minutes without interruption. No homework to check, no dinner to make, no bedtime stories about brave princesses and the dragons they befriended instead of slaying. Just him and the work he was actually quite good at when given the chance to think. The storm hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, snow swirling in hypnotic patterns against the black sky. From up here, Boston looked like a snow globe someone had shaken too hard. The streets below were deserted, streetlights casting orange halos through the white chaos. It was beautiful in a dangerous way, the kind of beauty that could kill you if you weren't careful. Ethan saved his work and leaned back in his chair, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. He should go. The tea would be a nightmare, if it was even running. His 12-year-old Camry was parked in the garage 3 blocks away, probably already buried under half a foot of snow. But something kept him in his seat, some indefinable resistance to returning to an empty apartment, to rooms that still echoed with absence even after 3 years. He stood and stretched, his back cracking pleasantly. Maybe he would grab a coffee from the break room before heading out. Or maybe he would just stand at the window for a few minutes and watch the city vanish. That was when he heard it. A sound so out of place in this temple of corporate composure that at first his brain refused to process it. Someone was crying. Not the polite, stifled tears of a disappointed employee or the frustrated sobs of someone missing a deadline. This was raw, uncontrolled weeping, the kind that comes from a place so deep that trying to stop it only makes it worse. Ethan froze, his hand still on the back of his chair. The sound was coming from the executive corridor, the hallway he had only walked down twice in his 2 years at Sterling Technologies, both times to deliver urgent reports that couldn't wait for email. That corridor was sacred ground, reserved for the handful of people whose decisions shaped the company's future. People who definitely did not cry at 9:30 on a Thursday night. He should leave. Whatever was happening behind those frosted glass walls was none of his business. Sterling Technologies had 4,700 employees across 6 continents, and there was an unspoken rule. You stayed in your lane. Financial analysts did not wander into executive territory uninvited, especially not to investigate sounds that suggested someone important was having a very bad night. But the crying continued, and Ethan found himself moving toward it, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet that marked the transition from common employee space to executive privilege. The hallway stretched before him, doors closed and dark except for one, the corner office, the largest, most coveted space on the floor with windows on 2 walls and a view that probably cost more than his annual salary just to rent. Light spilled from the doorway, and through the frosted glass panels on either side, Ethan could see a silhouette. Someone sitting hunched forward, shoulders shaking. The crying was quieter now, but no less devastating, each sob sounding like it was being torn from somewhere vital. Ethan stopped 10 feet from the door. Every instinct told him to turn around, to pretend he had heard nothing, seen nothing. But he had heard this kind of crying before. He had made these sounds himself, in the weeks and months after Sarah died, when Maya was asleep, and he could finally let the grief out without scaring her. He knew what it felt like to break in private, to hold everything together all day, and then shatter the moment you were alone. He couldn't just walk away. "Hello?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Is everything okay?" The crying stopped instantly, cut off like a switch had been flipped. Silence rushed into the vacuum, so complete that Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. He waited, suddenly aware of how presumptuous he was being, how badly this could go. Movement behind the glass. The silhouette stood, became taller, straighter. A hand reached up, probably wiping at eyes. Then footsteps, measured and deliberate, approaching the door. When it opened, Ethan felt his breath catch. Vivian Sterling stood in the doorway, and she looked nothing like the woman whose face appeared on the cover of Forbes and Fortune. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a flawless twist, hung loose around her shoulders, slightly disheveled. Her makeup, normally impeccable, was smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than his car, but she had kicked off her heels, and there was a vulnerability in her bare feet that made his chest tighten. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were the color of winter storms, gray-blue and fierce, even swollen from crying. Eyes that could cut through excuses and see straight to the truth of things. Eyes that were currently looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise? Embarrassment? Something else beneath it all. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was hoarse but controlled, each word carefully measured. "I didn't realize anyone else was still here." Ethan felt a small shock that she knew his name. Sterling Technologies had thousands of employees. He was nobody, just another analyst buried in spreadsheets on the 42nd floor. "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." A muscle twitched in her jaw. For a moment he thought she would shut the door in his face, or worse, ask him what gave him the right to intrude on her privacy. Instead, she studied him with those storm-colored eyes, and he felt exposed in a way he hadn't experienced since Sarah used to look at him across the dinner table and know, just know, when he was pretending everything was fine. "I'm fine," Vivian said, but her hand tightened on the doorframe, betraying her. "Thank you for your concern. You should go home before the storm gets worse." She was right. He should go. Should apologize for overstepping and disappear back to his desk to gather his things. Instead, he heard himself say, "Nobody cries like that if they're fine." Vivian's expression shifted, something cracking in that perfect composure. Her lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat he thought she might actually tell him the truth. Then her defenses slammed back into place, the CEO mask reassembling itself. "That's not your concern, Mr. Cole." "You're right. I'm sorry." Ethan took a step back. "I'll go." "Wait!" The words stopped him mid-turn. When he looked back, Vivian was staring at him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. She seemed to be weighing something, calculating odds, running scenarios through that brilliant mind everyone said could predict market movements before they happened. "What time is it?" she asked suddenly. Ethan glanced at his watch. 9:37. Vivian closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, something had changed. She looked desperate in a way that didn't match her billion-dollar empire or her corner office. "I need your help." The words hung in the air between them, absurd and impossible. Vivian Sterling needed his help. A woman who commanded boardrooms and made venture capitalists sweat needed something from Ethan Cole, single father and mid-level financial analyst who bought his suits at Macy's. "With what?" he managed. Vivian stepped back from the doorway, gesturing him inside. "Come in, please. I'll explain, but not in the hallway." Ethan hesitated for only a second before following her into the corner office. He had never been inside this room, and it was exactly what he expected and nothing like it at the same time. Floor-to-ceiling windows on two walls showed the storm in all its fury, snow hammering against the glass like it was trying to get in. The furniture was modern and expensive, all clean lines and subtle luxury, but what struck him was how impersonal it felt. No photos on the desk, no artwork that suggested actual taste rather than just expensive decoration. It looked like a hotel suite someone had been living in for years without ever really settling in. Vivian closed the door behind him and moved to her desk, where a crystal tumbler sat half full of what looked like whiskey. She picked it up but didn't drink, just held it like she needed something to do with her hands. "I have a situation," she began, her voice steadier now but still carrying that hoarse edge. "And I realize what I'm about to ask is completely inappropriate and possibly insane, but I'm out of options, and you're here and I'm desperate enough to try." Ethan waited, his mind running through increasingly unlikely scenarios. She needed money? Impossible. She was worth billions. She needed legal help? She had an army of lawyers. She needed... "There's a wedding tonight," Vivian continued, the words coming faster now. "My cousin's wedding at the Four Seasons. It started at 7. I was supposed to be there 2 hours ago." She laughed, a bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. "I was sitting in my car in the parking garage, dressed and ready, and I just couldn't make myself go." She finally took a drink, a small sip that seemed to steady her. "My entire family is there, my mother, my aunts and uncles. All the cousins I grew up with and haven't seen in months because I've been too busy building this empire." She gestured vaguely at the office around them. "And my ex-fiancé. He'll be there too, standing up as the best man, actually, because of course he is. Because he's perfect and charming and everyone loves him." Ethan still didn't understand where this was going, but he could hear the pain beneath her words, could see the way her hand trembled slightly around the glass. "I can't show up alone," Vivian said, looking at him directly now. "I know how that sounds. I know what it says about me that I can run a multi-billion-dollar company, but I can't face my own family without armor. But I need someone with me tonight, someone who can play a role, someone who can pretend to be..." She trailed off, and Ethan finished the sentence in his mind before she said it out loud. "My boyfriend," Vivian completed. "I need you to come to this wedding with me and pretend to be my boyfriend." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind howling against the windows. Ethan stared at her, certain he had misheard. "You want me to what?" "I know how it sounds." Vivian set down the glass and pressed her palms flat against the desk, like she needed to ground herself. "I know this is insane, but I've been telling my mother for months that I've been seeing someone stable and real and not from this world of money and expectations. I made him up because I was tired of the questions, tired of being treated like I'm broken because I'm not married with children by 30. And tonight, when I was sitting in that car, I realized I couldn't face walking into that ballroom and admitting I'd been lying, that I'm exactly as empty and isolated as they all think I am." She looked up at him, and in her eyes, Ethan saw something he recognized from his own mirror on bad nights. Fear. Raw, honest fear of being seen as the person she was afraid she might actually be. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Vivian almost smiled. "Because you're here. Because you heard me crying and you didn't run away. Because I looked you up in the system 3 minutes ago while you were standing in the hallway, and you're a widower with a daughter, which means you understand loss and you're probably kind, and kind people are better at pretending than you'd think." She paused. "And because you have kind eyes, and my mother will like that." Ethan should say no. Should tell her this was crazy and inappropriate and a terrible idea on every level. Should explain that he had a daughter to think about, a reputation to protect, a life that didn't include pretending to be someone's fake boyfriend at a billionaire family wedding. But he remembered the sound of her crying, remembered that raw, desperate grief, remembered what it felt like to be so alone that you'd do anything, ask anything, just to not have to face the darkness by yourself. "What time do we need to leave?" he heard himself say. Vivian's expression transformed, relief flooding across her features so completely that she looked 10 years younger. "Now, right now. I have clothes you can change into in the executive washroom. I keep emergency options for unexpected meetings. We'll need to get our story straight on the drive there." "Okay." Ethan couldn't quite believe what he was agreeing to, but something about the situation felt inevitable, like he had been moving toward this moment all night without knowing it. "But I need to understand something first. Why does it matter so much? What are you really afraid of?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her desk. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid they're right. That I've built this entire life around being untouchable because I'm terrified of being touched. that I've convinced myself power and control are enough because I don't know how to let anyone close enough to hurt me. She met his eyes. And I'm afraid that if I walk into that wedding alone, after telling everyone I'd finally found someone, my mother will look at me with that sad, knowing expression, and I'll see the truth reflected back. That I'm going to die alone in an office just like this one, having won everything except the things that actually matter. The honesty of it hit Ethan in the chest. He thought about his apartment in Brighton, about the rooms that still felt empty even with Maya's laughter filling them, about the way he had built walls around his heart after Sarah died, telling himself it was about protecting Maya when really it was about protecting himself. "I'll do it," he said, "but we do this right. If I'm going to pretend to be your boyfriend, you need to tell me who you really are. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, the person underneath." Vivian studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Deal. But the same goes for you, Mr. Cole." "Ethan," he corrected. "If we're dating, you should probably call me Ethan." "Vivian," she replied, and for the first time that night she almost smiled. "Let's go before I lose my nerve completely." 20 minutes later, Ethan stood in the executive washroom wearing clothes that fit surprisingly well: dark slacks, a crisp white shirt, and a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than everything in his closet combined. Vivian had given him privacy to change, and when he emerged, she was waiting in the hallway, her hair now pulled back, makeup repaired, every trace of vulnerability carefully erased except for a slight redness in her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "You clean up well," she observed, but her tone was distracted. She was already moving toward the elevators, her phone in her hand. "I told my mother we got caught in the storm. She's annoyed, but she'll forgive us if we're there for the reception." They rode the elevator down in silence, the tension between them shifting from awkward to something else, something that felt almost like partnership. In the parking garage, Vivian led him to a sleek black Mercedes that looked like it could survive a missile strike. She handed him the keys. "You drive," she said. "If we're selling this relationship, you should drive." Ethan took the keys, their fingers brushing briefly. "Are you always this calculating?" "Yes," Vivian answered without hesitation. "It's how I've survived." The storm was worse than he had expected. Snow came down so thick that the wipers could barely keep up, and visibility extended maybe 10 feet beyond the hood. Ethan drove slowly, carefully, while beside him Vivian outlined their cover story with the precision of someone planning a military operation. "We met 4 months ago," she said, her voice steady and businesslike, "at a charity event for children's literacy. You were there because your daughter's school was one of the beneficiaries. We started talking about books, about raising kids, about life outside of work. I asked you out for coffee the next week." "Did you?" Ethan asked, fighting to keep the car steady as wind hammered them from the side. "In this story, yes." Vivian glanced at him. "We've been seeing each other quietly since then, taking it slow because you have a daughter, and I have a company, and we're both careful people. Tonight is the first time I'm introducing you to my family." "Why did you wait so long?" "Because you wanted to be sure it was serious before meeting them. And because I wanted to be sure you could handle the circus that is the Sterling family." Ethan navigated around an abandoned car, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the snow. "What else do I need to know?" Vivian was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its professional edge. "My mother's name is Catherine. She's going to be polite to you, but she'll be evaluating every word you say, every gesture you make. She'll want to know your background, your education, your intentions. Don't lie to her. She can smell lies like a bloodhound. Just be yourself, but the version of yourself who's confident enough to date me." "And your ex-fiancé?" Her hands tightened in her lap. "Harrison Blackwell. We were engaged for 8 months, 3 years ago. He ended it because he said I loved my company more than I could ever love him. He wasn't wrong." She paused. "He'll probably try to talk to you. He'll be charming and friendly because that's who he is. Don't let him get under your skin, and don't let him get under mine." Ethan glanced at her, seeing the tension in her jaw, the way she was holding herself too carefully. "Are you still in love with him?" "No." The answer came quickly, firmly. "But I'm still angry at him for being right about me. And I'm angry at myself for proving him right every day since." They drove in silence for several minutes, the storm creating a strange intimacy in the car, like they were the only 2 people left in the city. Finally, Ethan said, Tell me something real. Not about the fake relationship. Something true about you that I wouldn't learn from Forbes magazine. Vivian turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her features. Why? Because if I'm going to pretend to care about you, I'd like to actually know something worth caring about. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, softly, I'm afraid of the dark. Have been since I was 7. I sleep with a nightlight, which is absurd for a 30-year-old woman. But the dark feels too much like being alone, and being alone feels too much like not existing at all. The confession hung between them, fragile and honest. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared loneliness. My daughter saved my life, he offered in return. After my wife died, I wanted to give up, wanted to just stop trying. But Maya needed me, and that need was the only thing that kept me getting out of bed every morning. I'm terrified that one day she won't need me anymore, and I won't know who I am without someone depending on me. Vivian looked at him with those storm-colored eyes, and for a moment neither of them was pretending anything. We're both pretty broken, aren't we? Yeah, Ethan agreed. We are. The Four Seasons appeared through the snow like a beacon, its windows blazing with light and warmth. Ethan pulled up to the valet station, where attendants in long coats rushed forward with umbrellas. As he handed over the keys, he felt Vivian's hand slip into his, her fingers cold and slightly trembling. Ready? She asked, and he heard the fear beneath the question. Ethan squeezed her hand, surprising himself with how natural it felt. Let's go meet your family. They walked through the lobby together, snow melting on their shoulders, hands still clasped. Vivian moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in places like this, but Ethan could feel the tension radiating from her, could sense the armor clicking into place with every step. The ballroom was on the second floor, and they could hear the music and laughter before they reached the doors. Vivian paused outside, taking a deep breath, her free hand smoothing down her dress. Last chance to run, she said, trying for lightness and not quite achieving it. Ethan looked at her. This brilliant, terrified woman who ran a billion-dollar empire but couldn't face her family alone, and made a decision. I'm not going anywhere. Something in her expression softened, gratitude and relief, and something else he couldn't name. Then she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and became Vivian Sterling, CEO, untouchable and in control. They walked through the doors together, and the noise of the reception washed over them. The ballroom was elegant and overcrowded, filled with people in expensive clothes holding expensive drinks and making expensive small talk. A band played smooth jazz in the corner. The dance floor was crowded with couples swaying to the music. Vivian's hand tightened on his as heads began to turn, as people noticed their arrival. Ethan could feel the weight of their attention, could sense the curiosity and judgment and speculation. This was a different world, one where he didn't know the rules or speak the language. A woman in her late 50s detached from a nearby group and moved toward them with the purposeful grace of someone used to getting her way. She wore a silver gown that probably cost more than Ethan's car, and her dark hair was shot through with gray in a way that looked intentional and elegant. Her eyes, the same winter storm color as Vivian's, swept over Ethan with surgical precision. Vivian. The name was delivered with precisely calibrated disappointment. 2 hours late to your own cousin's wedding. I hope you have a good excuse. The storm, Mother. Vivian's voice was cooler now, more controlled. The roads are nearly impassable. We're lucky we made it at all. She drew Ethan forward slightly. This is Ethan Cole. Ethan, my mother, Catherine Sterling. Ethan extended his hand, forcing himself to meet Catherine's evaluating gaze. Mrs. Sterling, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm sorry we're late. The delay was my fault. I insisted we drive carefully. Catherine's handshake was brief but firm, her fingers cool and dry. How very sensible of you, Mr. Cole. Her eyes flicked to Vivian. So this is the mysterious boyfriend we've heard so little about. I prefer to keep my personal life personal, Mother. You know that. I know many things about you, darling. What I don't know is anything about Mr. Cole here. Catherine turned her full attention to Ethan, and he felt like a specimen under a microscope. Vivian mentioned you work at her company? I'm a financial analyst. I work on market projections and investment risk assessment. Fascinating. Catherine's tone suggested it was anything but. And how does one meet the CEO when one works in, what floor did you say? 42. Ethan supplied, refusing to be intimidated. We met at a literacy charity event. Your daughter has a passion for children's education that most people don't see. He felt Vivian's surprise at the easy lie, the way he had already internalized their cover story. Catherine's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval. Indeed, she does. Vivian has many passions that people don't see. Catherine glanced between them, measuring something. Well, Mr. Cole, you've certainly picked an interesting time to make your debut. I hope you're prepared for the Sterling family in full force. I've faced worse, Ethan said, thinking of hospital waiting rooms and funeral arrangements and explaining death to a 5-year-old. Catherine studied him for another long moment, then nodded once, crisply. I suppose we'll see. The bar is that way. The bride and groom are accepting congratulations near the cake. Try not to disappear again, Vivian. People are talking. She swept away, leaving Ethan and Vivian standing together in the crowd. Vivian exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. That went better than expected, she murmured. She usually eats my dates for breakfast. Is that what I am now? Ethan asked, surprising himself with the teasing note in his voice. Your date? Vivian looked up at him, and for just a second he saw past the armor to the woman underneath. For tonight, at least. Come on, let me introduce you to the circus. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and careful conversations. Ethan met cousins and aunts and uncles, each one evaluating him with varying degrees of subtlety. Vivian stayed close, her hand finding his whenever they moved through the crowd, and slowly Ethan began to understand the dynamics at play. This wasn't just a family. This was an ecosystem of wealth and power and old grudges, wrapped in expensive clothes and polite smiles. Every conversation had layers, every question was a test, and Vivian navigated it all with practiced ease, deflecting personal questions and redirecting attention with the skill of someone who had been doing this her entire life. But Ethan could feel the cost, could see the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the way she held herself with such careful control that she looked like she might shatter if someone bumped her too hard. They were standing at the bar when a man approached, and Ethan felt Vivian go rigid beside him. Harrison Blackwell was exactly what Ethan had expected and worse. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to worry about money or acceptance. He wore his tuxedo like it was a second skin, and his smile was warm and genuine in a way that made Ethan dislike him immediately. Vivian, Harrison's voice was smooth, practiced. You made it. I was starting to worry the storm had claimed you. Harrison. Vivian's tone was carefully neutral. Congratulations on your speech earlier. I heard it was lovely. You would have heard it in person if you'd arrived on time. There was no criticism in his words, just gentle teasing, but Ethan saw Vivian's jaw tighten. Harrison turned to him, extending his hand. I don't believe we've met, Harrison Blackwell. Ethan Cole. He shook the offered hand, matching Harrison's grip. Vivian's boyfriend. Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, too quick to read. Is that so? Vivian, you've been holding out on us. When did this happen? 4 months ago, Vivian said smoothly. And before you ask, no, I wasn't planning to announce it at my cousin's wedding. Some things are better kept private. 4 months. Harrison's smile never wavered. That's practically a record for you, Viv. Usually you get bored after 6 weeks. Ethan felt Vivian's hand tighten on his arm, her nails digging in slightly through his jacket. People change, Harrison, or they're supposed to. Of course they do. Harrison's gaze moved between them, assessing. So what do you do, Ethan? Let me guess. Venture capital? Private equity? Financial analysis. I work at Sterling Technologies, actually. Harrison's eyebrows rose. Really? How modern of you, Vivian. Dating an employee. I'm sure HR has thoughts about that. HR works for me, Vivian said coldly, and Ethan is brilliant at what he does. Unlike some people, I value competence over pedigree. The barb hit home. Harrison's smile tightened fractionally. Of course you do. That's always been your way, hasn't it? Work first, everything else a distant second. He turned back to Ethan. I hope you're prepared for that, Ethan. Dating Vivian Sterling means accepting that you'll never actually be the priority. The company comes first. It always does. Ethan felt anger flare in his chest, protective and fierce. Before he could think better of it, he said, You know what I've learned in 4 months? Vivian doesn't put work first because she doesn't care about anything else. She does it because she cares so much about everything that the only way to handle it is to control what she can. And maybe if you'd understood that 3 years ago, you'd be the one standing here instead of giving speeches at someone else's wedding. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Harrison's smile had vanished completely, replaced by something harder, more honest. Vivian stood frozen beside Ethan, her eyes wide with shock. "Well," Harrison said finally, his voice tight. "It seems you've found someone with teeth, Vivian. How refreshing." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "I hope it lasts longer than we did. Enjoy the wedding." He walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ethan watched him go, his heart hammering, adrenaline making his hand shake slightly. "Ethan." Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. "What you just said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No one has ever defended me like that." She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, something raw and vulnerable and surprised. "No one has ever seen me like that," and said it out loud. Before Ethan could respond, she took his hand and pulled him toward the terrace doors, weaving through the crowd with determination. They emerged into the storm, snow immediately stinging Ethan's face, wind tearing at his clothes. The terrace was empty, decorated for a summer wedding that had been moved indoors, with heaters now fighting a losing battle against winter. Vivian walked to the railing, her arms wrapped around herself, breathing hard. The city spread out below them, white and glowing and impossibly beautiful. Ethan joined her, giving her space but staying close enough that she knew he was there. "I hate him," Vivian said finally, her voice raw. "I hate that he still gets under my skin. I hate that he's right about me. I hate that I let him be right." "He's not right about you." She laughed, bitter and broken. "Yes, he is. I do put work first. I do prioritize control over connection. I do exactly what he accused me of doing. Because someone hurt you." Ethan spoke quietly, snow gathering on his shoulders. "Because being in control feels safer than being vulnerable. Because the alternative is letting someone in far enough that they can destroy you when they leave." Vivian turned to look at him, and he saw tears on her face mixing with the snow. "How do you know that?" "Because I do the same thing, just in different ways." Ethan moved closer until they were standing side by side at the railing. "After my wife died, I built my whole life around being there for Maya, being the perfect father, the reliable employee, the guy who always has it together. But really, I was just making sure I never had to feel that kind of loss again. If I don't let anyone in, they can't leave." "Does it work?" Vivian asked softly. "No. It just makes you lonely." He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek, surprising himself with the intimacy of the gesture. "And eventually you realize that being lonely is its own kind of death. Slower, maybe, but just as final." Vivian stared at him, and in her eyes he saw recognition, understanding, the mirror of his own fear and loneliness. The storm swirled around them, and somewhere inside music played and people danced and a wedding continued without them. "I'm tired of being alone," Vivian whispered. "I'm so tired of pretending that I don't need anyone, that I'm enough all by myself." "You are enough," Ethan said. "But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone." She closed her eyes, fresh tears streaming down her face, and this time she didn't try to hide them. Ethan did the only thing that made sense. He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried against his chest, her body shaking with sobs she had probably been holding in for years. And he realized, standing there in the storm with this brilliant, broken woman in his arms, that somewhere in the last 3 hours the pretending had stopped being pretend, that he cared about her in a way that had nothing to do with fake relationships or cover stories, that she had seen his loneliness and he had seen hers, and that recognition was more intimate than anything he had felt since Sarah died. When Vivian finally pulled back, her makeup was ruined and her hair was full of snow, and she looked more real than she had all night. She looked up at him with those storm-colored eyes, searching his face for something. "This is crazy," she said. "We just met. We're supposed to be pretending. None of this is real." "I know," Ethan agreed, his heart pounding. "So why does it feel real?" He didn't have an answer, or maybe he did, but saying it out loud would make it true, would make it something he couldn't take back. So instead, he cupped her face in his hands, giving her every chance to pull away, to laugh it off, to remember that this was all supposed to be fake. She didn't pull away. When he kissed her, it was soft and tentative, and nothing like pretending. It was snow and tears, and the taste of expensive champagne and something deeper, something that felt like two people who had been alone for too long finally finding each other in the storm. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine and almost joyful. "We are in so much trouble." "Yeah," Ethan agreed, unable to stop smiling. "We really are." They stood there for another moment, foreheads touching, while the storm raged around them and inside music played, and somewhere their absence was probably being noticed and discussed. But for right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. They had found each other in the storm, and that was enough. The warmth of the ballroom hit them like a wall when they stepped back inside, snow melting instantly on their clothes and leaving dark spots on the expensive fabric. Ethan's hair was damp, plastered to his forehead, and Vivian's carefully repaired makeup was once again streaked down her face. They must have looked like survivors of some disaster, stumbling in from the storm with wild eyes and trembling hands. But something had shifted between them on that terrace. The pretense had burned away in the cold, leaving something raw and real and terrifying in its honesty. Vivian's hand was still in his, her fingers intertwined with his own, and neither of them seemed willing to let go. "We should clean up," Vivian said, but she didn't move. Her eyes were locked on his face, searching for something, maybe confirmation that what had just happened was real and not some fever dream born of desperation and champagne. "Ladies' room is that way," Ethan replied, nodding toward a hallway he had noticed earlier. "I'll find the men's room. Meet you back here in 10 minutes? Vivian nodded, but as she started to pull away, her grip tightened for just a moment, a small gesture that said more than words could. Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Ethan standing alone with his heart still racing and his lips still tingling from a kiss that had felt like crossing a line he hadn't known existed. In the men's room, he stared at himself in the gilt-edged mirror. His hair was a disaster, his borrowed jacket spotted with melted snow, and there was a wildness in his eyes that he barely recognized. He looked like someone who had just made a decision that would change everything, for better or worse. "What are you doing?" he asked his reflection. "You came here to help a stranger. You weren't supposed to actually feel anything." But the problem was that he did feel something, more than something. Standing on that terrace with Vivian in his arms, he had felt more alive than he had in 3 years. More present, more himself. And that terrified him almost as much as it exhilarated him. He cleaned himself up as best he could, smoothing his hair back and brushing snow from his shoulders. When he returned to the ballroom, Vivian was already waiting, and his breath caught at the sight of her. She had somehow transformed herself again, her makeup repaired, her hair pulled back into a slightly looser style that looked almost casual. But her eyes gave her away. They were brighter now, more alive, and when she looked at him, something passed between them that made the crowded room feel suddenly very small. "Better?" she asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice that didn't match her composed exterior. "Perfect," Ethan said, and meant it. Before either of them could say more, a young woman in a white wedding dress appeared, her face flushed with champagne and happiness. This had to be the bride, Vivian's cousin, whose name Ethan couldn't remember if it had ever been mentioned. "Vivian!" The bride threw her arms around Vivian with the unself-conscious affection of someone who had known her since childhood. "You made it. I was so worried the storm would keep you away completely. Mother said you got stuck in traffic for hours." "Something like that," Vivian replied, returning the embrace with genuine warmth that surprised Ethan. This was a different side of her, softer and less guarded. "Congratulations, Emma. You look absolutely radiant." Emma pulled back, her eyes immediately finding Ethan with the frank curiosity of someone who had grown up with Vivian and knew all her secrets. "And this must be the famous boyfriend we've all heard absolutely nothing about until tonight." Guilty as charged," Ethan said, extending his hand. "Ethan Cole. And congratulations on your wedding. What I saw of the ceremony was beautiful." It was a safe lie, given that they had arrived hours late, but Emma seemed pleased. "Oh, you're charming," Emma said, shaking his hand while studying his face with unnerving intensity. "And you actually smile. That's different. Vivian's usual type tends toward the brooding and emotionally unavailable." She shot Vivian a teasing look. Present company from the past excluded, of course. Emma, Vivian warned, but there was affection in her tone. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Harrison is lovely and all, but he was always a bit too perfect, you know? Like a Ken doll that someone taught to discuss market trends. Emma turned back to Ethan. You seem more real, more human. I approve. That's quite the endorsement, Ethan said, genuinely amused. I'll try to live up to it. Emma's expression turned more serious, though her smile never quite faded. Take care of her, okay? She acts like she doesn't need anyone, but we all need someone. Even billionaire CEOs who could buy and sell small countries. Emma, Vivian said, more firmly this time, you're drunk. I'm happy, Emma corrected, and possibly a little drunk, but I'm also right. You know I'm right. She squeezed Vivian's hand. I'm glad you came, and I'm glad you didn't come alone. With a final bright smile, she swept away to greet other guests, leaving Vivian and Ethan standing in the wake of her cheerful chaos. I'm sorry about her, Vivian said. Emma has never learned the concept of boundaries. I like her, Ethan said honestly. She clearly cares about you. She's one of the few members of my family who sees me as more than just a success story or a cautionary tale. Vivian's gaze followed Emma across the room. We were close growing up, before I got busy building an empire and forgot how to just be a person. Before Ethan could respond, Catherine Sterling materialized beside them with the unnerving timing of someone who had been watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. Vivian, darling, I need to borrow you for a moment. Aunt Margaret wants to hear about your latest acquisition, and you know how she gets when she feels ignored. Mother, I'm in the middle of... It will only take a moment, Catherine interrupted smoothly. Her eyes flicked to Ethan. I'm sure Mr. Cole can entertain himself for a few minutes. The bar is excellent, and I believe there are several people here from the financial sector he might find interesting to network with. It was a dismissal wrapped in politeness, and Ethan recognized it for what it was, a test. Catherine wanted to separate them, to evaluate them individually, to see if the story held up under scrutiny. Vivian must have realized it too, because her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Go ahead, Ethan said, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. I'll be fine. Vivian hesitated, her eyes searching his face. Don't let anyone interrogate you too harshly. I survived Harrison. I think I can handle your relatives. She almost smiled at that, then allowed herself to be led away by Catherine, glancing back over her shoulder once before disappearing into the crowd. Ethan watched her go, feeling oddly bereft without her presence beside him, which was ridiculous considering he had known her for all of 4 hours. He made his way to the bar and ordered a whiskey, neat. The bartender obliged with professional efficiency, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid that probably cost more per ounce than Ethan's hourly wage. He was taking his first sip when a voice beside him said, So you're the mystery man who supposedly tamed the Ice Queen. Ethan turned to find a man in his late 30s leaning against the bar, his bow tie slightly loosened, his expression caught somewhere between amused and skeptical. He had the same general look as most of the men here, expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive everything, but there was a directness to his gaze that Ethan appreciated. I don't think anyone tames Vivian Sterling, Ethan replied carefully, and anyone who thinks they can is probably delusional. The man laughed, a genuine sound that seemed out of place in this carefully orchestrated atmosphere. Smart answer. I'm Marcus Chen, by the way. Vivian's second cousin on her mother's side, though we practically grew up together. Our mothers made sure we spent every summer at the family compound in the Hamptons, whether we wanted to or not. Ethan Cole. They shook hands. And I get the feeling you're about to tell me something I should know about Vivian. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just curious about the guy who managed to get past her defenses. That's not an easy feat. Trust me, I've watched a lot of people try and fail spectacularly. Marcus signaled the bartender for a refill. She's been different the last few months, though. Lighter, somehow. Less like she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. I'm guessing that has something to do with you? Ethan thought about the woman who had been crying in her office just hours ago, who had admitted to being terrified of the dark and of being alone. I don't know about that. Vivian is pretty self-sufficient. Self-sufficient is one word for it. Isolated is another. Marcus studied him over the rim of his glass. Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but the Sterling family has a way of eating people alive, especially people who get involved with Vivian. The expectations, the scrutiny, the constant judgment, it's a lot. And Vivian herself, brilliant as she is, has a tendency to prioritize everything except her own happiness. So if you're just playing around, if this is some kind of fling, do everyone a favor and end it now before it gets messy. And if it's not a fling? Ethan asked, surprising himself with the question. Marcus's expression softened slightly. Then buckle up, because you're in for one hell of a ride. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be good for each other. He raised his glass. Here's hoping you're the real deal, Ethan Cole. Vivian deserves someone who actually sees her. They clinked glasses, and Ethan felt the weight of the words settle on his shoulders. Across the room, he could see Vivian standing with a cluster of older women, her posture perfect, her smile polished, every inch the successful CEO. But he could also see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept flickering toward the exit, looking for escape routes. She looks miserable, Ethan observed. She always does at these things, Marcus agreed. Family gatherings are her personal nightmare. Too many memories, too many expectations, too many people who remember who she was before she became who she is. And then there's Harrison, wandering around like a ghost of relationships past. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Harrison Blackwell appeared in Ethan's peripheral vision, moving through the crowd with easy confidence. He stopped to chat with several groups, his laughter carrying across the room, and Ethan felt an irrational spike of irritation. He still loves her, you know, Marcus said quietly. Harrison. He's dated half a dozen women since their engagement ended, but none of them were her. None of them had that fire, that brilliance. I think he's been waiting for her to come back to him. That's not going to happen, Ethan said with more certainty than he probably had a right to feel. Marcus smiled. Good. Because she deserves better than someone who couldn't handle who she really was. She deserves someone who isn't intimidated by her success, who doesn't need her to be smaller to make himself feel bigger. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. I hope that's you, man. I really do. Before Ethan could formulate a response, music swelled through the ballroom, and the bandleader announced the first dance. The bride and groom took to the floor, and the crowd gathered around to watch. Ethan found himself scanning the room for Vivian, and when their eyes met across the distance, something electric passed between them. She excused herself from the group of relatives and made her way to him, her movements fluid and purposeful. When she reached his side, she didn't speak, just slipped her hand into his and squeezed gently. How was Aunt Margaret? Ethan asked. Exhausting. She wanted to know every detail of the Nexus acquisition, and she has very strong opinions about my management style. Vivian's jaw tightened. According to her, I'm too aggressive, too ambitious, and I need to soften my approach if I want to be taken seriously in the long term. That's rich, coming from a family that built its fortune on ruthless business practices. Double standards are a Sterling family tradition. Vivian watched the bride and groom spinning slowly on the dance floor, her expression wistful. Emma looks happy. She is happy. She told me to take care of you. Vivian's gaze snapped to him. She said what? She said you act like you don't need anyone, but everyone needs someone, even billionaire CEOs. Ethan turned to face her fully. She's not wrong. Everyone's an expert on my emotional needs tonight, apparently. But there was no real heat in Vivian's words, just a tired resignation. What did my mother say to you before she dragged me away? She didn't say anything to me. She just wanted to separate us, to see if the story held up when we weren't together to corroborate it. Vivian closed her eyes briefly. Of course she did. Catherine Sterling, master strategist. She's probably grilling you via proxy right now, gathering intelligence from everyone you've talked to. As if to prove her point, Ethan noticed several people watching them with poorly disguised interest, their conversations punctuated by glances in their direction. The scrutiny was starting to feel suffocating, like being under a microscope where every gesture was analyzed for meaning. Dance with me, Vivian said suddenly. Ethan blinked. What? Dance with me. Right now. If we're going to sell this relationship, we need to look comfortable together, and I need to do something normal before I lose my mind completely. She was already pulling him toward the dance floor, where other couples had joined the bride and groom in a slow waltz. Ethan let himself be led, his heart kicking up its pace as Vivian turned to face him, placing one hand on his shoulder while her other remained in his. He settled his free hand at her waist, feeling the warmth of her through the fabric of her dress, and they began to move. "I should warn you," Ethan said, "I'm not a great dancer. Sarah and I took lessons before our wedding, but that was 10 years ago." "You're doing fine," Vivian assured him, though her voice was tight with something that wasn't about dancing. "Just follow my lead." They swayed together, finding a rhythm that was slightly offbeat but worked nonetheless. Around them, other couples danced and laughed and celebrated, but Ethan was acutely aware only of Vivian. The scent of her perfume, the way her fingers trembled slightly in his, the fact that she was holding herself with such rigid control that she might as well have been made of glass. "You can relax," he murmured, close to her ear. "I'm not going to break you." "That's what you think." But she did relax, fractionally, leaning into him just a little more, letting some of the tension drain from her shoulders. "Thank you for being here, for doing this. I know it's insane and I had no right to ask." "You didn't ask. You told me you needed help, and I said yes. There's a difference." "Still, this is well above and beyond the call of duty for a fake boyfriend." She pulled back enough to look at him, her storm-colored eyes searching his face. "Why are you really doing this, Ethan? And don't say it's because I was crying. There has to be more to it than that." Ethan considered the question, considered lying or deflecting or giving her the easy answer she probably expected. Instead, he told her the truth. "Because when I looked at you tonight, I saw myself. Someone who's built walls so high they forgot how to let anyone in. Someone who's so used to being alone that they've convinced themselves they prefer it that way. And I thought maybe if I could help you, even just for one night, it would mean I haven't completely lost the ability to connect with another human being." Vivian's expression shifted, softening into something that looked almost like wonder. "You're either the most genuinely kind person I've ever met, or you're even more broken than I am. Can't it be both?" She laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face, making her look younger and lighter and almost carefree. "I suppose it can. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two damaged people pretending to be in a relationship, so I don't have to admit to my family that I'm exactly as lonely as they think I am." "Except it stopped being pretend on the terrace," Ethan said quietly. "Didn't it?" The laughter died in Vivian's eyes, replaced by something deeper, more complicated. "I don't know what it is now. I don't know what we're doing. All I know is that when you kissed me, I felt something I haven't felt in years, maybe ever. And that terrifies me more than any board meeting or hostile takeover. Welcome to the club. I'm terrified too." They continued dancing, the music washing over them, and for a few minutes neither of them spoke. Ethan was intensely aware of the eyes watching them, of Catherine Sterling observing from the edge of the dance floor, of Harrison Blackwell standing near the bar with an expression that suggested he was doing calculations in his head. "He's staring at us," Ethan said. Vivian didn't need to ask who. "He's trying to figure out if you're real or if I hired you to make him jealous." And what would he conclude? That I'm either brilliant or desperate, and with me it's usually both. She hesitated, then added quietly, "He's going to try to talk to me again before the night is over. Probably try to convince me that I'm making a mistake, that you're not right for me, that I should give him another chance." "What will you say?" "That depends." Vivian looked up at him, vulnerability written across her features. "Are you going to disappear when this night is over? Go back to being just another analyst on the 42nd floor while I go back to being the lonely CEO in the corner office?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Ethan knew what the smart answer was. Knew that getting involved with his boss, with someone from a completely different world, with someone whose life was so complicated it came with armed security and family dynasties, was asking for disaster. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was, "I don't want to disappear." Vivian's breath hitched. "You don't?" "No. I don't know what this is or where it's going, but I know I'm not ready for it to end." He pulled her closer, their bodies fitting together in a way that felt natural despite the absurdity of the situation. "Is that crazy?" "Completely insane," Vivian agreed. We barely know each other. This could be the worst idea either of us has ever had. Or it could be the best." She smiled, small and tentative but genuine. "Or that." The song ended, transitioning into something more upbeat, and couples around them shifted and reformed, Ethan and Vivian stood still for a moment, neither willing to break the connection, until Catherine appeared at Vivian's elbow with the impeccable timing of someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to interrupt. Vivian, there's someone who wants to meet you, Jonathan Carlyle from Carlyle Ventures. He's interested in discussing potential collaboration. Catherine's smile was perfectly pleasant and completely implacable. I'm sure Ethan won't mind if I steal you away for a few minutes. It wasn't a request. Vivian's hand tightened on Ethan's for a moment, then she released him with visible reluctance. I'll be right back. Take your time, Ethan said, even though he didn't mean it. He watched her walk away with her mother, watched the way she straightened her spine and lifted her chin, becoming the CEO again, the woman who commanded rooms and closed billion-dollar deals. And he wondered if he was completely out of his mind for thinking they could make this work. She always does that, you know. Ethan turned to find a woman in her late 20s standing beside him, holding a champagne flute and studying him with open curiosity. She had dark hair and sharp features, and something about the intelligence in her eyes reminded him of Vivian. Does what? He asked. Lets our mother lead her around like a prize show pony. The woman extended her hand. I'm Diana Sterling, Vivian's younger sister, and you're the mysterious boyfriend who's caused quite the stir tonight. Ethan shook her hand, surprised. Vivian hadn't mentioned a sister. Ethan Cole, and I'm not sure I'd say I caused a stir, more like walked into one. Diana laughed. Diplomatic answer. I like you already, which is more than I can say for most of Vivian's previous attempts at dating. Harrison was charming, but empty, and the one before him was so obsessed with her money he might as well have had dollar signs tattooed on his forehead. She sipped her champagne. You seem different, more grounded, less interested in what she can do for you. I'm not interested in what she can do for me at all, Ethan said honestly. I'm interested in her, the actual person, not the CEO. Well, that's refreshing. Diana's expression turned more serious. Can I give you some unsolicited advice? I have a feeling you're going to regardless. Fair point. Here it is. Vivian is brilliant and driven and absolutely terrible at letting people in. She's going to push you away at some point, probably sooner rather than later, because that's what she does when she starts to care about someone. She'll convince herself you're better off without her, or that she's too busy, or that the relationship is getting in the way of her work. And if you let her push you away, she'll be devastated, but she'll never admit it. What do you suggest I do instead? Push back. Don't let her use work as an excuse to avoid dealing with actual emotions. Call her on her bullshit when she tries to hide behind her CEO persona. And for the love of everything, don't let our mother intimidate you. Catherine has been trying to control Vivian's life since birth, and it's probably the biggest reason Vivian is the way she is. Ethan absorbed this information, watching Vivian across the room as she spoke with the venture capitalist. Her expression animated, her hands gesturing as she made some point. Even from a distance, he could see the passion in her, the fire that drove her. Why are you telling me this? He asked Diana. Because I love my sister, and I'm tired of watching her be miserable while pretending to have it all together. You make her smile, Ethan. I saw it when you were dancing. That's not something money can buy, and it's not something she's had in a very long time. Diana finished her champagne. Don't screw it up. She walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and a growing sense that he had stepped into something far more complicated than a simple fake relationship. Around him, the wedding reception continued, the volume rising as alcohol flowed and inhibitions lowered. He made his way back to the bar, nursing another whiskey and trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. It was surreal, all of it. This morning he had woken up in his small Brighton apartment, made Maya breakfast, dropped her at school, gone to work expecting a normal day. Now he was standing in a ballroom at the Four Seasons, wearing clothes that cost more than his monthly rent, pretending to be the boyfriend of one of the most powerful women in Boston, while slowly realizing the pretending had become something real. Quite the evening, isn't it? Ethan didn't need to turn around to know who was speaking. Harrison Blackwell's voice was unmistakable, smooth and cultured with just a hint of condescension. It's something, Ethan agreed, not bothering to look at him. Harrison moved to stand beside him at the bar, ordering a scotch with the easy familiarity of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. I've been watching you and Vivian all night. You're good together, I'll give you that. Very convincing. We're not trying to convince anyone of anything. Aren't you? Harrison's smile was knowing. Come on, Ethan, you work for her company. You're not exactly from her world. And she conveniently produces a boyfriend right when she needs to prove to her family that she's not completely married to her work. The timing is suspicious, don't you think? Ethan finally turned to face him. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Vivian is brilliant at strategy, at playing the long game. And if she needed someone to play a role tonight, she'd choose someone who wouldn't threaten her real priorities. Someone safe. Someone who wouldn't actually demand anything from her. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Harrison leaned against the bar, his expression almost pitying. I was engaged to her, remember? I know exactly how she operates. She'll let you get close enough to be useful, but never close enough to actually matter. She'll schedule time for you between board meetings and conference calls. She'll be charming and attentive when it's convenient, and completely absent when work demands it. And eventually, you'll realize you're dating a ghost, someone who's never fully present because her mind is always somewhere else. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest, hot and protective. That's not who she is. It's exactly who she is. And I say this not to be cruel, but to save you the heartbreak I went through. Vivian Sterling doesn't know how to be in a real relationship. She doesn't know how to put someone else first. It's not her fault. It's how she was raised, how she survived. But it means she's fundamentally incapable of giving you what you need. And what's that? To actually be chosen. To matter more than a quarterly earnings report or a merger negotiation. To be the priority instead of the afterthought. Harrison's expression softened slightly. Look, I don't hate her. I actually still care about her, which is probably pathetic after 3 years. But I learned a hard lesson when we were together. You can't love someone who won't let themselves be loved. And Vivian has walls so high and so thick that no one gets through, not even me, and I tried for months. Maybe you just didn't try hard enough, Ethan said quietly. Or maybe you were trying to change her instead of accepting who she actually is. Harrison's jaw tightened. And you think you can do better? I think she deserves someone who sees her walls as protection instead of rejection. Someone who understands that she built them for good reasons and doesn't demand she tear them down immediately. Ethan met Harrison's gaze steadily. I think she deserves someone who's willing to wait, to earn her trust, to prove that it's safe to let someone in. How noble, Harrison said, but there was something brittle in his tone now. We'll see how long that idealism lasts when you're sitting alone at midnight because she's still at the office. When you plan a weekend away and she cancels because of an emergency that's somehow always more important than you. When you realize you're competing with an entire company for her attention and you're always going to lose. Before Ethan could respond, Vivian appeared at his side, her hand immediately finding his arm, her expression tight with barely controlled anger. Harrison, I see you've met Ethan. We were just getting acquainted, Harrison said smoothly, having a frank discussion about what it's like to date Vivian Sterling. How thoughtful of you to share your expertise. Vivian's voice could have cut glass. Though I'm sure your perspective is a bit outdated, considering we broke up 3 years ago and you have no idea who I am now. People don't change that much, Viv. Not fundamentally. You'd be surprised. She turned to Ethan, her storm-colored eyes searching his face. Can we get some air? I need to get away from this room for a few minutes. Of course. Ethan let her lead him away, acutely aware of Harrison watching them go, of the weight of his words still hanging in the air like smoke. They made their way through the crowd and into a quieter corridor lined with abstract paintings and expensive furniture. Vivian kept walking until they reached a small alcove with a window overlooking the storm, which had intensified, snow falling so thick it looked like static on a television screen. I'm sorry, Vivian said, her voice tight. I saw you talking to him and I couldn't let him poison this before it even has a chance to start. He didn't poison anything. He just told me what he thinks about you. Vivian turned to face him, her expression guarded. And what does he think? That you're incapable of putting anyone before your work. That you'll always choose the company over the relationship. That I'm setting myself up for heartbreak if I think this can be real. Ethan paused. Is he right? The question hung between them, raw and honest. Vivian's eyes widened slightly, and he could see her calculating, weighing her response, deciding how much truth to offer. I don't know, she finally said, and the honesty of it cut deeper than any lie could have. Harrison isn't completely wrong. I do prioritize my work. I do struggle with letting people in, and I have canceled plans and missed events and chosen the company over personal relationships more times than I can count. She took a shaky breath. But that doesn't mean I can't change. It doesn't mean I don't want to be different. Do you want to be different? Yes. The word came out fierce and immediate. I'm tired of being alone, Ethan. I'm tired of going home to an empty penthouse and telling myself it's enough. I'm tired of having everything except the things that actually matter. But wanting to change and knowing how to change are two very different things. Ethan stepped closer, reaching out to cup her face gently in his hands. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time. No grand promises or impossible expectations. Just two broken people trying to be less broken. Vivian's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, her hands coming up to cover his. Why are you being so understanding? Why aren't you running in the opposite direction after everything you've heard tonight? Because I heard the same warnings about myself after Sarah died. Everyone told Maya's grandparents that I was too broken to be a good father, that I couldn't handle the responsibility, that she deserved better than a grieving widower who could barely function. But they gave me a chance anyway, and I proved them wrong. Maybe you just need someone to give you the same chance. A single tear escaped, trailing down Vivian's cheek. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you either, but if we're both too afraid of getting hurt to even try, we'll definitely end up alone. He brushed the tear away with his thumb. I'm willing to risk it, if you are. Vivian searched his eyes for a long moment, and Ethan could see the war happening behind her gaze, fear and hope battling for dominance. Finally, she nodded, so slightly he almost missed it. Okay, she whispered. Okay, let's try. And then she was kissing him, desperate and fierce, like she was trying to convince herself this was real, that he was real, that she was allowed to want this. Ethan kissed her back, pouring 3 years of loneliness and longing into the contact. And for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, to the warmth of her mouth and the taste of champagne and the feeling of finally not being alone. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian rested her forehead against his chest. We should go back before people start talking. Let them talk, she laughed, shaky but genuine. Spoken like someone who's never been the subject of sterling family gossip. Trust me, we want to control the narrative. They straightened their clothes and composed themselves, and Vivian reached up to wipe a trace of lipstick from the corner of Ethan's mouth, the gesture so intimate and domestic it made his chest ache. Then, hand in hand, they walked back into the ballroom to face whatever came next. The ballroom had transformed in their absence. The formal reception had given way to something looser, more chaotic. Ties had been loosened, heels abandoned, and the dance floor was packed with bodies moving to music that had shifted from elegant jazz to something with actual bass. The storm continued to rage outside the windows, turning the world beyond the glass into nothing but white static. As if they were all trapped in a snow globe, someone had forgotten to stop shaking. Vivian's hand tightened in Ethan's as they navigated through the crowd. He could feel the tension radiating from her, the way she held herself with practiced composure, even as her eyes darted around the room, cataloging exits and potential threats, like a general surveying a battlefield. There's champagne on the terrace tables, she said, nodding toward the far side of the ballroom where French doors led to the covered outdoor space they had escaped to earlier. We should grab some before Vivian Sterling, as I live and breathe. The voice cut through the noise like a knife, cultured and sharp, and dripping with the kind of condescension that came from old money and older grudges. Ethan felt Vivian go rigid beside him as a woman in her 60s approached, her silver gown immaculate, her gray hair styled in a way that probably required a team of professionals to maintain. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege and the absolute certainty that she was better than everyone else in the room. Aunt Margaret, Vivian said, her voice carefully neutral. How lovely to see you. I'm sure it is. Margaret's gaze swept over Vivian with the precision of someone cataloging flaws for later discussion. Though I must say, arriving 2 hours late to your own cousin's wedding is rather poor form, even for you. But then again, punctuality has never been your strong suit when business calls, has it? The storm made travel difficult, Vivian replied, her tone giving nothing away. I'm sure you understand. Of course. Always an excuse. Margaret's attention shifted to Ethan, her eyes narrowing as she evaluated him with the same ruthless efficiency she had applied to Vivian. And this must be the mystery man Catherine mentioned, the one from your company. Ethan Cole, he said, extending his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Montgomery. Margaret Montgomery. She took his hand briefly. Her grip as cool and dry as dead leaves. My late husband was Jonathan Sterling's brother, which makes me Vivian's aunt by marriage, though I've known her since she was in diapers. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I understand you're some sort of financial analyst? The way she said it made the profession sound only slightly more respectable than street performer. Ethan felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression pleasant. That's right. I work in risk assessment and market forecasting. How industrious. Margaret turned back to Vivian. You're dating an employee now. Darling, I thought you'd learned your lesson about mixing business with pleasure. Remember that disaster with the tech consultant? What was his name? David? Daniel? Derek, Vivian said quietly, and Ethan heard the edge in her voice, sharp enough to draw blood. And that was 6 years ago, Aunt Margaret. I'd appreciate it if we could focus on celebrating Emma's wedding rather than rehashing my past mistakes. I'm simply concerned, dear. You have a reputation to maintain, and dating someone from your own company raises all sorts of questions about judgment and propriety. What do the board members think? Surely they have concerns about potential conflicts of interest. The board trusts my judgment, Vivian said, though Ethan noticed her fingers had gone white where they gripped his hand. And my personal life is exactly that, personal. Margaret made a dismissive sound. Nothing is personal when you're Vivian Sterling, darling. Everything you do reflects on the family, on the company, on the legacy your grandfather built. Surely you understand that by now. Ethan had heard enough. With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery, Vivian's grandfather built his company on innovation and taking calculated risks. I'd say she's honoring that legacy by making her own choices rather than letting others dictate her life. The silence that followed was absolute. Margaret stared at him as if he had just sprouted a second head, her expression cycling through shock, offense, and something that might have been grudging respect. Vivian's grip on his hand shifted from painful to almost desperate, though whether she wanted him to stop talking or keep going, he couldn't tell. Well, Margaret said finally, her voice tight. You certainly have opinions, Mr. Cole. How refreshing to see someone with a spine in Vivian's orbit. Most of her previous companions were too busy being impressed by her bank account to actually stand up for her. She studied him for another long moment, then sniffed delicately. I suppose you'll do. For now, try not to embarrass the family too badly. She swept away, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and disapproval. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, and beside him Vivian made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I cannot believe you just said that to Margaret Montgomery, she whispered, her eyes wide with something between horror and admiration. Do you have any idea who she is? She sits on the boards of 6 major corporations. She's personal friends with 3 senators. She once made a grown man cry at a charity gala by politely dismantling his entire business model over appetizers. She was being rude to you, Ethan said simply. Someone needed to push back. Vivian stared at him, and slowly a smile spread across her face, genuine and bright and transformative. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. He pulled her closer, lowering his voice. Are you okay? You went very still when she mentioned your past. The smile faded, replaced by something more guarded. Margaret has a gift for finding pressure points and pressing them. Derek was a mistake, a significant one. I let my feelings cloud my judgment, and it nearly cost me a major client contract. After that, I swore I'd never mix business with personal life again. And yet here we are, Ethan observed. Here we are, Vivian agreed, her storm-colored eyes searching his face. Breaking all my rules. Before either of them could say more, the music shifted again, slowing to something soft and romantic. Couples drifted back onto the dance floor, and Emma appeared at the microphone with her new husband, both of them flushed with happiness and champagne. Thank you all for celebrating with us tonight, Emma said, her voice slightly slurred but full of genuine joy. Despite the storm trying its best to ruin everything, you all made it here, and that means the world to us. Now, I know tradition says this is when we do the bouquet toss, but honestly, I'm too drunk to throw straight, so instead I'm going to hand this directly to my cousin Vivian, because it's about damn time she got another shot at happiness. The crowd laughed and applauded as Emma navigated off the small stage and made her way directly to Vivian, who looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Emma pressed the bouquet, an elaborate arrangement of white roses and winter greenery, into Vivian's hands with exaggerated ceremony. "There," Emma declared, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Now you have to get married within a year. That's the rule." "I don't make the rules, Vivian. That's just how bouquets work." "You're drunk," Vivian said, but she was smiling despite her obvious embarrassment. "Drunk on love," Emma agreed cheerfully, then leaned in to whisper something that made Vivian's expression shift from amused to stunned. Emma pulled back with a conspiratorial wink, squeezed Ethan's shoulder in passing, and returned to her husband, leaving Vivian holding the bouquet like it might explode. "What did she say?" Ethan asked. Vivian shook her head, a complicated expression on her face. "She said she saw us on the terrace earlier, through the window. She said she's never seen me look at anyone the way I looked at you, and that I should stop being afraid and just let myself be happy for once." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning and possibility, and the terrifying vulnerability of hope. Around them, the party continued, but Ethan felt like they were in a bubble, separate from the celebration, caught in a moment that felt suspended outside normal time. "She's not wrong," Vivian continued, her voice barely audible over the music. "About being afraid. I'm terrified, Ethan. Absolutely terrified that I'm going to mess this up, that I'll hurt you or push you away or prove Harrison right about everything." "Then don't," Ethan said simply. "Don't what?" "Don't push me away. Don't run when it gets hard. Don't convince yourself you're better off alone." He reached out and gently touched one of the roses in the bouquet she still held. "I know it's scary. I'm scared too. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared means it actually matters." Vivian looked down at the flowers, then back up at him, and Ethan saw the moment something shifted in her expression, some internal wall cracking just enough to let light through. "Dance with me again," she said. "Please. I just want to feel normal for a few more minutes before reality sets in." They moved back to the dance floor, and this time when Vivian stepped into his arms, there was less hesitation, less careful distance. She pressed close, her head resting against his shoulder, the bouquet trapped between them, and they swayed together while the storm hammered at the windows and the rest of the world faded to background noise. "Tell me about your daughter," Vivian said softly. "You've mentioned her, but I don't really know anything except that she's 8 and she saved your life." Ethan felt his chest tighten with the familiar mixture of love and fear that always came when he thought about Maya. "She's everything. Smart, funny, stubborn as hell. She looks exactly like her mother, which kills me and saves me in equal measure. She wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up, but only for dogs because cats are too aloof and she doesn't trust them." Vivian laughed quietly against his shoulder. "Sounds like someone with strong opinions." "She is. She has opinions about everything, what we eat for dinner, what movies are acceptable, why homework is a conspiracy designed to prevent children from having fun. Sometimes I feel like I'm failing her, like I can't possibly be enough to make up for losing Sarah. But then she'll do something like leave me a note that says, 'I love you, Daddy,' with about 17 hearts drawn around it, and I remember why I keep trying." "You're not failing her," Vivian said with quiet certainty. "The fact that you worry about it means you're doing it right. Bad parents don't worry. They just assume they're perfect and wonder why their kids grow up broken." There was something raw in her voice, something that spoke of personal experience. Ethan pulled back enough to see her face. "Is that what happened to you?" Vivian's expression shuddered slightly, old defenses clicking into place. "My parents weren't bad. They were just absent. Too busy building the sterling empire to notice they were raising a daughter who learned to equate love with achievement. I was 7 the first time I realized my father only smiled at me when I brought home perfect grades. 10, when I figured out my mother's approval was directly tied to how well I performed at social functions. By the time I was 12, I had learned to bury everything I felt and just be whatever they needed me to be." That's why you're afraid of the dark, Ethan said, understanding clicking into place. Because being alone in the dark meant being alone with all the feelings you weren't allowed to have. Vivian nodded, her throat working as she swallowed hard. I used to lie awake at night in my bedroom, which was about the size of your apartment, probably, and feel so incredibly small and insignificant. Like I could disappear and no one would notice unless it affected the quarterly earnings or the family reputation. The nightlight started as a practical thing. I was reading business books and financial reports under the covers, so I'd have something to talk about at breakfast. But it became necessary, a reminder that I still existed, even in the dark. Ethan tightened his arms around her, wishing he could reach back through time and tell that scared little girl that she mattered for more than her achievements. You exist now, and you matter now. Not because of sterling technologies or your bank account or any of it, just because you're you. I don't even know who that is, Vivian whispered. I've spent so long being the CEO, being the success story, being the sterling golden child who exceeded every expectation that I'm not sure there's a real person underneath anymore. Maybe I'm just an empty shell playing a role. That's not true. I've seen the real you tonight, the person who cries in her office, who gets nervous at family weddings, who's terrified of being alone but even more terrified of letting someone close, who kisses like she's afraid it might be the last time anyone ever wants to. He cupped her face, making her look at him. That's the real Vivian Sterling, and she's so much more than what anyone sees on a magazine cover. Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks, and she didn't try to hide them this time, just let them fall while holding his gaze. Why do you see me when no one else does? Because I'm looking for you, not for who you're supposed to be. There's a difference. The song ended, replaced by something faster, more upbeat, but they stayed locked together, swaying slightly out of time with the music, lost in their own rhythm. Around them, the party continued to escalate, voices getting louder as inhibitions lowered, but Ethan barely noticed. All his attention was focused on the woman in his arms, on the way she was finally letting him see her without all the armor. Vivian! The voice cut through their bubble like a blade. Harrison stood a few feet away, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes hard. Can we talk? Privately? Vivian stiffened in Ethan's arms, and he felt her pulling away, the walls starting to rebuild. Harrison, this isn't the time. Please. Harrison's voice was quiet but insistent. Just 5 minutes. There are things I need to say, things I should have said 3 years ago. You owe me that much. She doesn't owe you anything, Ethan said, the words coming out harder than he intended. Harrison's gaze flicked to him, dismissive. This doesn't concern you. This is between Vivian and me. Actually, it concerns me quite a bit, considering I'm her boyfriend. Are you? Harrison smiled, cold and knowing. Or are you just tonight's convenient solution to a family problem? Tell me, Ethan, did she mention me before you walked into this wedding? Did she explain why she really needed you here? Ethan felt Vivian tense beside him, felt her hand tighten on his arm, and realized with sinking certainty that Harrison had just struck at a vulnerability he didn't know existed. He looked at Vivian, searching her face for answers, and saw guilt written across her features. Vivian, he said quietly. I told you he would be here, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I told you about the family expectations, about needing someone with me. But you didn't tell me I was specifically here as armor against him, did you? Ethan felt something cold settling in his chest. You let me think this was about your family in general, about not wanting to be alone. You didn't mention that the entire point was to prove to your ex-fiancé that you'd moved on. It's more complicated than that. Vivian's eyes were wide, desperate, and Ethan could see her scrambling for words, for explanations, for some way to make this better. Is it? Harrison interjected, his voice soft with false sympathy. Or is it exactly as simple as it seems? Vivian needed a prop for the evening, someone presentable to parade in front of me, and you happened to be in the right place at the right time. How does it feel, Ethan, being used like that? Shut up, Harrison. Vivian's voice was sharp, furious. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I know you, Vivian, better than anyone. I know how you operate when you're backed into a corner. I know how you strategize and plan and use whatever resources are available to achieve your objectives. Harrison turned to Ethan, his expression almost pitying. She's brilliant at it, absolutely brilliant. But it means everyone in her life is just a piece on her chessboard. including you." The words hit like physical blows, and Ethan felt the foundation of the entire evening shifting beneath him. He looked at Vivian, really looked at her, trying to separate truth from manipulation, real emotion from performance. And the terrible thing was, he couldn't be sure. Everything Harrison was saying aligned too well with what he'd learned about Vivian tonight. Her need for control, her ability to compartmentalize, her fear of vulnerability. "Tell him he's wrong," Ethan said quietly. "Tell me that this," he gestured between them, "wasn't just a convenient solution to your family problem." Vivian's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her hands were shaking, her eyes bright with tears, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched between them, damning in its weight. "I thought so," Harrison said, satisfaction creeping into his tone. "Vivian, when you're ready to have an actual conversation about us, about the real possibility of trying again with someone who actually understands you, I'll be at the bar. In the meantime, I think you owe Mr. Cole an apology for wasting his evening." He walked away, leaving Ethan and Vivian standing in the middle of the dance floor while couples moved around them, oblivious to the small devastation occurring in their midst. "Ethan, please." Vivian reached for him, but he took a step back, needing space, needing air, needing something to make sense in a night that had spiraled completely out of control. "Was he right?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. "Was I just a convenient prop? A way to make him jealous?" "No, yes, I don't know." Vivian's words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and honest and confused. "When I asked you to come, part of it was about him as him. I can't deny that. I couldn't face walking in here alone knowing he'd be standing there looking perfect and successful and completely over me. But then we talked, and we danced, and everything changed. It stopped being about him and started being about us. About this thing happening between us that I never expected." "How am I supposed to know what's real?" Ethan interrupted. "How am I supposed to trust that any of this is genuine when you've been strategizing and planning all night? When you admitted yourself that you're brilliant at using people to achieve your objectives? That's not fair, isn't it?" Ethan felt anger rising now, hot and protective of the hope he'd let himself feel. "You asked me here under false pretenses. You let me think I was helping you deal with general family anxiety, when really I was a weapon you were wielding against your ex-fiancé. You let me kiss you, let me believe we were building something real, all while knowing that I was just playing a role you'd assigned me." "It became real!" Vivian's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby dancers. "I didn't plan for that. I didn't expect to feel anything. But I do, Ethan. I feel everything, and it terrifies me, and maybe I handled it badly, but that doesn't make it less true." "How do I know?" Ethan asked, and heard the rawness in his own voice, the vulnerability he hadn't let himself show since Sarah died. "How do I know you're not just telling me what I want to hear? How do I know this isn't another strategic move?" Vivian stared at him, tears streaming down her face, her composure completely shattered. "You don't. You can't. That's what trust is, Ethan. It's choosing to believe someone when you have no guarantee they won't destroy you. It's what I'm asking you to do right now, even though I know I don't deserve it after the way this started." The honesty of it stopped him cold. This was Vivian without armor, without strategy, without any of the careful control she usually wielded. This was her asking him to take a leap of faith, even though she'd given him every reason not to. And standing there, looking at her tear-stained face and trembling hands, Ethan realized he was at a crossroads. He could walk away, protect himself, return to the safe loneliness he'd built around his life. Or he could choose to believe her, to risk being hurt, to bet everything on the possibility that what they'd found tonight was real, despite its imperfect beginning. "I need air," he said finally, his voice rough. "I need to think. Ethan, please just give me a minute." He walked away before she could respond, navigating through the crowd toward the terrace doors. The cold hit him like a slap when he stepped outside, snow immediately stinging his face, but he welcomed it. He needed something sharp and real to cut through the confusion. The terrace was empty except for the snow-covered furniture and the ghost of their earlier kiss. Ethan gripped the railing, staring out at the white chaos of the storm, trying to sort through everything that had happened in the last few hours. He had come here to help someone. That part was simple. Vivian had been crying, desperate, and he'd agreed to play a role to get her through a difficult night. That was the deal. That was what he'd signed up for. But somewhere between the car ride and the dancing, between the family introductions and the terrace kiss, it had stopped being performance and started being something real. He'd felt it in the way she looked at him, in the tremor of her hands, in the honesty of her tears. Unless he was completely delusional, Vivian had felt it too. The question was whether that mattered, whether real feelings could grow from false foundations, whether a relationship that started as strategy could become something genuine. "I thought I might find you out here." Ethan turned to find Diana Sterling standing in the doorway, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her expression serious. "Did Vivian send you?" "No, she's currently locked in the ladies' room, having what I'm pretty sure is a complete breakdown. Catherine is furious, Harrison is looking smug, and the family gossip mill is in overdrive." Diana stepped fully onto the terrace, closing the door behind her. "So I thought I'd come find you and offer some perspective." "I'm not sure I'm in the mood for perspective." "Tough. You're getting it anyway." Diana moved to stand beside him at the railing, both of them staring out at the storm. "Harrison is a manipulative bastard who never got over being dumped by the one woman who wouldn't rearrange her entire life for him. Everything he said to you was designed to drive a wedge between you and Vivian because he can't stand the idea of her being happy with someone else. That doesn't mean he was wrong. Doesn't mean he was right either." Diana pulled the coat tighter around herself. "Here's what I know. Vivian has been miserable for 3 years. Completely, utterly miserable, even though she hides it well. She throws herself into work because it's the only thing that makes her feel like she has control. She dates occasionally, but never seriously because she's convinced herself she's better off alone. And she lies to our mother about having a boyfriend because she's desperate to prove she's not the empty shell everyone thinks she is. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. I'm not done." Diana shot him a look. "Tonight, I watched my sister smile, really smile, not the polite corporate version or the forced family gathering version. I watched her lean into you like she trusts you to hold her up. I watched her cry without hiding it, laugh without calculating whether it was appropriate, kiss you like she forgot anyone was watching. That's not strategy, Ethan. That's not performance. That's Vivian finally letting someone see her, and it's the most human I've seen her in years." Ethan absorbed this, wanting to believe it, afraid to believe it. "She still lied to me about why I was really here." "She did," Diana agreed. "Because she's terrified and broken and doesn't know how to ask for what she needs without wrapping it in strategy and control. Because she spent her entire life being taught that vulnerability is weakness and honesty is liability. Because she's so used to playing chess with everyone that she doesn't remember how to just be real." Diana paused. "But she's trying, Ethan. For the first time in her life, she's actually trying. And if you walk away now, you'll be proving every fear she's ever had about letting people in." "That's not fair," Ethan said quietly. "I'm not responsible for her healing." "You're right. You're not. Vivian has to do her own work, make her own choices, learn her own lessons. But you asked her to trust you, to let you in, to believe that this could be real. And now that she's actually done it, now that she's standing there without any armor asking you to believe in her, you're the one who's running scared." The words hit harder than they should have because they were true. Ethan was scared. Scared of being used, scared of being hurt, scared of opening his heart to someone who might not be able to give him what he needed. All the same fears Vivian had, just wrapped in different packaging. "What if she can't do it?" he asked quietly. "What if she tries and fails? What if I let myself care about her and she chooses the company over me every time? Then you'll have your answer, and you can walk away knowing you tried. But what if she can do it? What if having someone who actually believes in her is exactly what she needs to become the person she's always wanted to be?" Diana put a hand on his arm. "My sister is terrified right now. Absolutely terrified. Not because Harrison said mean things or because the family is gossiping. She's terrified because for the first time in her life, she wants something more than she wants control. And she doesn't know if you're going to give her a chance to prove she can choose differently." Ethan closed his eyes, snow gathering on his eyelashes, and thought about Maya. About how scared he'd been after Sarah died, convinced he couldn't possibly be enough for his daughter. About how her grandparents had taken a chance on him anyway, had trusted him to figure it out, and how that trust had saved both their lives. Maybe Vivian deserved the same chance. Maybe they both did. "She's in the ladies' room?" he asked. Diana smiled. Third door on the left past the coat check. And Ethan? Thank you for not giving up on her. He didn't respond, just headed back inside, snow melting on his shoulders as he navigated through the ballroom toward the ladies' room. He knocked on the door, earning a startled look from a woman emerging with freshly applied lipstick. "Vivian?" he called. "Are you in there?" Silence. Then quietly, "Go away, Ethan." "No." "I'm serious. Just go home. I'll have my driver take you. I'll explain everything to my family. You don't have to do this anymore." "Can you unlock the door, please?" More silence. Then the sound of a lock clicking, and the door opened just enough for him to see Vivian's face. Her makeup was completely ruined, her eyes red and swollen, her hair falling loose from its pins. She looked devastated and young, and so vulnerable it made his chest ache. "I'm sorry," she said before he could speak. "You're right about everything. I used you. I manipulated you. I put my own needs first without considering what it would do to you. I'm exactly the person Harrison said I was, and you should run as far away from me as possible." Ethan pushed the door open wider and stepped inside the absurdly luxurious ladies' room with its marble counters and soft lighting. "Are you done?" Vivian blinked at him, confused. "What? Are you done telling me what I should think and feel? Done deciding for me what I can handle? Done protecting me from yourself?" He moved closer, backing her gently against the counter. "Because I've spent the last 15 minutes on that terrace thinking about everything that happened tonight, and I've come to some conclusions. Ethan, you did use me. That part's true. You brought me here as armor against Harrison and your family, and you weren't completely honest about it. That was wrong, and it hurt." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "But I also think that somewhere between the office and here, between the fake relationship and the real kisses, something changed for both of us. I think you stopped performing and started feeling, and I think that scares you more than anything else in your life." Vivian's breath hitched, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Of course it scares me. Everything about you scares me, the way you see me, the way you make me want things I've convinced myself I can't have, the way you look at me like I'm worth more than my net worth or my company or any of it. You are worth more than all of that." "How do you know?" "You've known me for 5 hours. Because in 5 hours, you've shown me more of yourself than most people show in 5 years. You've cried in front of me, trusted me with your fears, let me see you without any armor. That's real, Vivian. Maybe the beginning was strategy, but this," he gestured between them, "this is real." "I don't know how to do real," Vivian whispered. "I don't know how to be in a relationship without controlling everything. I don't know how to put someone else first. Harrison was right about that. I will probably choose work over you sometimes. I will probably disappoint you and hurt you and prove that I'm exactly as broken as everyone thinks." "Probably," Ethan agreed, and saw a surprise flicker across her face. "And I'll probably disappoint you too. I'll probably be too cautious, too protective, too stuck in my grief to always be present. I'll probably make you feel second to Maya sometimes because she is my first priority and she always will be. We're both going to mess this up in spectacular ways. Then why are you still here? Because perfect isn't real, and real is what I want. Because I'm tired of being alone, and I think you are too. Because when you kissed me on that terrace, I felt something I haven't felt in 3 years, and I'm not ready to walk away from it just because it started imperfectly." He wiped tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "Because I think we could be good for each other if we're brave enough to try." Vivian stared at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt or deception. "What if I hurt you? What if you don't? What if I can't change? What if you can? What if this is the biggest mistake either of us ever makes? What if it's not?" Ethan leaned his forehead against hers. "We can what if ourselves into paralysis, or we can just see what happens. One day at a time, no grand promises, no impossible expectations, just two broken people trying to figure it out together." Vivian closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something had shifted. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something else. Hope. Fragile and terrifying and impossibly brave. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. One day at a time." And then she was kissing him, and Ethan was kissing her back, and nothing was solved or settled, but somehow that was okay. They would figure it out. Together. When they finally broke apart, Vivian laughed shakily and gestured at her ruined makeup. I look like a disaster. You look beautiful. Liar. But she was smiling, really smiling, and Ethan felt something warm unfurling in his chest. What happens now? He asked. Vivian took a deep breath, straightening her spine, and he watched the CEO click partially back into place. But this time there was something different about it. She was putting on armor, yes, but she wasn't hiding behind it completely. Now we go back out there, and I tell Harrison exactly where he can shove his opinions about my life. And then you and I are getting out of here before my family decides to interrogate us further. And then? And then we'll figure out what happens next. She reached out and straightened his collar, the gesture intimate and domestic. Together. They walked out of the ladies' room hand in hand, and Ethan felt the weight of eyes on them immediately. The ballroom had quieted slightly, the party winding down as the storm intensified and people began making plans to leave or secure hotel rooms rather than attempt the drive home. Harrison was indeed at the bar, his posture too casual, his eyes tracking their movement across the room. Vivian led Ethan directly to him, her chin lifted, her hand steady in his. "Harrison," she said, her voice clear and cold, "I need to make something very clear to you." Harrison turned, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm listening. You were right about some things. I do prioritize work. I do struggle with letting people in. I did bring Ethan here partly because I didn't want to face you alone." She paused, and Ethan felt her fingers tighten in his. "But you were wrong about the most important thing. Ethan isn't a prop or a strategy or a weapon. He's someone who sees me, really sees me, and chooses to care anyway. That's something you never did. You loved the idea of me, the version you thought you could shape me into. But you never actually loved me." Harrison's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Vivian. I loved you enough to end things when I realized you'd never put me first. That took courage." "No," Vivian said quietly. "It took cowardice. Real courage would have been staying and fighting for us. Real love would have been accepting me as I was, instead of demanding I become someone smaller and more convenient. You gave up on me, Harrison, and now you get to live with that choice while I move forward with someone who doesn't need me to be anything other than exactly who I am." She turned away, pulling Ethan with her, and they walked toward the exit without looking back. Behind them, Ethan heard the murmur of conversation starting up again, the speculation and gossip that would probably follow them for months. But for the first time all night, he didn't care. Because Vivian's hand was in his, and she had just chosen him over her ex-fiancé, over her family's expectations, over the easy path of retreat. She had chosen to be brave. And that was everything. They made it halfway across the ballroom before Catherine Sterling intercepted them, materializing from a cluster of relatives with the precision of a guided missile. Her expression was carefully composed, but Ethan could see the steel beneath the polish, the barely controlled fury of a woman who had just watched her daughter make a scene in front of Boston's elite. "Vivian," Catherine's voice was silk over ice. "A word, privately." "Mother, we're leaving." "I said privately." Catherine's gaze flicked to Ethan, dismissive and cold. "Mr. Cole, I'm sure you can entertain yourself for a few minutes while I speak with my daughter." Vivian's hand tightened in his, a silent plea, and Ethan felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could insist on staying, could play the protective boyfriend and refuse to let Catherine separate them. But something in Vivian's expression told him this was a battle she needed to fight herself, a line she needed to draw without him standing between her and her mother. "I'll wait by the coat check," he said quietly, squeezing her hand before releasing it. Vivian's eyes widened slightly, surprise and maybe gratitude flickering across her features. "I won't be long." Catherine led her daughter toward a quiet alcove near the windows, and Ethan forced himself to walk away, to trust that Vivian could handle whatever was coming. He retrieved their coats from the attendant, watching from a distance as mother and daughter stood facing each other, their body language rigid with tension. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could read the progression of the conversation in their gestures. Catherine speaking with calm authority, her hands moving in measured arcs. Vivian standing with her arms crossed, defensive and defiant. Catherine reaching out to touch Vivian's arm, a gesture that looked maternal but carried undertones of control. Vivian pulling away, her voice rising enough that a few nearby guests glanced over curiously. Then Vivian said something that made Catherine go very still, her composed expression cracking for just a moment before reforming into something harder, colder. She responded with words that Ethan couldn't hear but could feel the weight of from across the room. Vivian's shoulders drew back, her chin lifted, and she spoke again, this time with a finality that suggested the conversation was over whether Catherine was finished or not. Vivian turned and walked away, leaving her mother standing alone in the alcove. As she approached Ethan, he could see she was trembling, her jaw clenched so tight he worried she might crack a tooth. "Let's go," she said, her voice rough. "Please, I need to get out of here right now." Ethan helped her into her coat, noting the way her fingers shook as she tried to button it. He did the buttons for her, a gesture that felt intimate and necessary, and she looked up at him with eyes that were glassy with unshed tears and something that might have been gratitude. They pushed through the doors into the hotel lobby, where chaos reigned. The storm had intensified to the point where travel was nearly impossible, and guests were lined up at the front desk trying to secure rooms for the night. Voices overlapped in frustration and anxiety, as people called car services that weren't running and argued about room availability. "Ms. Sterling," a young man in a hotel uniform appeared at Vivian's elbow, slightly breathless. "We have your suite ready whenever you need it. Top floor, as always. And we've arranged for Mr. Cole's vehicle to be brought up from the garage, though I should warn you that the roads are extremely dangerous right now. Several highways are already closed." Vivian nodded absently, pulling out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen and Ethan could see she was checking messages, emails, probably half a dozen apps that connected her to her company. Even now, even in the middle of everything, she was working. "Vivian," he said gently. She looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten he was there. "Sorry, I just need to check. There's an investor call scheduled for tomorrow morning, and if the storm is this bad, I'll need to reschedule." "Vivian?" She stopped, her fingers hovering over the screen, and he saw the moment she realized what she was doing. Saw the shame and frustration cross her face as she recognized the pattern Harrison had warned him about, the way she retreated into work whenever emotions got too overwhelming. "I'm sorry," she said again, this time softer, more honest. "This is what I do. When things get too real, too messy, I hide in spreadsheets and conference calls and things I can control." "I know." Ethan reached out and gently closed her phone, pushing it down. "But right now, you don't need to control anything. You just need to breathe." Vivian took a shaky breath, then another, her eyes locked on his. Around them, the lobby continued its organized chaos, but for a moment they were still, a small island of quiet in the storm. "What did your mother say to you?" Ethan asked. Vivian's expression hardened. "That I was making a fool of myself. That bringing you to the wedding was a desperate move that made me look weak and unstable. That Harrison was right about me being incapable of maintaining a real relationship, and I was proving it by clinging to the first man who showed me basic human kindness." Anger flared hot in Ethan's chest. "She said that to you? Tonight?" "She's always said things like that. It's how she operates. Surgical strikes designed to keep me in line, to remind me that my worth is tied to the family reputation and the company stock price." Vivian's voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized years ago. "I told her I didn't care what she thought, that I was 30 years old and I didn't need her permission to live my life or choose who I spend time with." "What did she say to that?" "That I'd regret throwing away everything I'd built for a relationship that would inevitably fail. That I was being naive and emotional and exactly the kind of foolish that women in our position couldn't afford to be." Vivian met his eyes. "And then I told her that maybe being foolish was better than being alone. That maybe I'd rather risk failure than guarantee emptiness." And I walked away before she could respond. Pride swelled in Ethan's chest, warm and fierce. "That took courage." "It took desperation," Vivian corrected. "I'm so tired of living my life according to her rules, her expectations, her version of what success should look like. I'm tired of being the perfect Sterling daughter who never makes mistakes or shows weakness or dares to want something just because it makes her happy." The young hotel employee cleared his throat delicately. "Ms. Sterling, about your suite." "Cancel it," Vivian said abruptly. "I'm not staying here tonight." The employee blinked, confused. "But the storm?" "I understand the storm. Cancel the suite anyway." She turned to Ethan. "Is your car still drivable?" "Probably. It's old but reliable." He studied her face, trying to read the intention behind the sudden decision. Where do you want to go? Away from here. Away from my family and their judgment and all of this. She gestured vaguely at the lobby, the wedding reception still audible from the ballroom. I don't care where, I just need to not be here anymore. Ethan made a decision that was probably reckless but felt absolutely right. My apartment. It's small and nothing fancy, but it's warm and quiet, and there's no one there who will judge you or make you feel like you're not enough. Vivian's eyes widened. Your apartment? Ethan, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Unless you'd rather go back to your penthouse alone. She shook her head quickly. No, not alone. I can't. Her voice cracked slightly. I really can't be alone right now. Then you won't be. He turned to the employee. Can you bring the car around? The gray Camry from the garage. Within 10 minutes, they were in Ethan's car, the heater blasting, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against snow that fell so thick it was like driving through a white tunnel. Visibility was maybe 15 feet at best, and the roads were treacherous, snow piling up faster than the plows could clear it. Ethan drove with careful precision, hands tight on the wheel, eyes straining to see the road ahead. Beside him, Vivian sat in silence, her expensive dress hidden under her coat, the bouquet Emma had given her still clutched in her lap like a talisman. The drive that should have taken 20 minutes took nearly an hour. They crawled through empty streets, past abandoned cars and darkened storefronts. The city transformed into something otherworldly and strange. Twice they had to detour around blocked roads, and once Ethan felt the wheels slip on ice, his heart lurching before the tires caught again. Tell me about where you live, Vivian said suddenly, breaking the silence. Distract me from imagining us sliding into a ditch. Ethan smiled despite the tension. It's nothing like what you're used to. 2-bedroom apartment in Brighton, 3rd floor of a building that's seen better days. The heat's inconsistent, the neighbors are loud, and there's a weird stain on the living room ceiling that the landlord swears he'll fix but never does. It sounds perfect, Vivian said, and sounded like she meant it. Maya's room is the bigger bedroom. She's got posters of dogs all over the walls and a collection of stuffed animals that's gotten completely out of control. My room is smaller, barely fits the bed and a dresser. The kitchen is the size of a closet, and the bathroom has tiles from the 70s that I'm pretty sure are original. And you love it, Vivian said softly. I do. Because it's ours. Because Maya picked out the paint color for her room, purple, naturally. And we hung her artwork on the fridge, and every scratch and stain has a story. It's not much, but it's home. Vivian was quiet for a moment, staring out at the snow. I have a penthouse in the Seaport District, 4,000 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows, designer everything. It was featured in Architectural Digest last year. And I hate it. I hate how empty it feels, how the echoes make it obvious there's only one person living there. I hate that the only personal items are awards and certificates and evidence of professional achievement. It's beautiful and soulless, and I've never once walked in and felt like I was coming home. So change it, Ethan said. Get some plants, hang pictures that actually mean something to you. Make it yours instead of just another showpiece. I don't know how, Vivian admitted. I've spent so long curating everything, making sure every visible piece of my life supports the image of success and control, that I've forgotten how to just exist without performing. Then maybe it's time to learn. They finally pulled up in front of Ethan's building, a brick structure that had probably been elegant in the 1940s and was now just tired. The snow was piled high on the sidewalk, and Ethan had to dig out a parking spot, his borrowed dress shoes completely inadequate for the task. Vivian helped without being asked, using her expensive heels to kick snow aside, both of them laughing at the absurdity of it. By the time they made it inside, they were soaked and freezing, tracking snow across the worn lobby carpet. The elevator was broken, because of course it was, so they climbed 3 flights of stairs, Vivian holding her dress up to avoid tripping. When Ethan unlocked the door to his apartment, he felt a moment of self-consciousness, seeing it through her eyes, the scuffed floors, the furniture that was functional but far from stylish, the general wear and tear of a life being actively lived. But Vivian stepped inside and immediately smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. It's wonderful, she said, looking around at Maya's drawings stuck to the walls with tape, the throw blanket draped over the sagging couch, the bookshelf crammed with children's books and dog-eared novels. It feels like people actually live here. We do our best. Ethan closed the door behind them, suddenly aware of how small the space was, how intimate it felt to have Vivian Sterling standing in his living room in her wedding dress and ruined makeup. Let me find you something dry to wear. You're going to freeze in that dress. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with sweatpants and a well-worn Red Sox t-shirt, items that had never seemed more inadequate. These will be too big, but at least they're warm. Vivian took them with a smile that was almost shy. Where can I change? Bathroom's right there. Towels are under the sink if you want to dry your hair. While she changed, Ethan quickly tidied up, shoving newspapers into the recycling and rinsing dishes that had been sitting in the sink since morning. He was pulling out the kettle for tea when Vivian emerged, and the sight of her stopped him cold. She looked completely different. The carefully constructed CEO had vanished, replaced by someone younger and softer, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. The sweatpants pooled around her feet, and she'd rolled the waistband several times to keep them up. The t-shirt hung off one shoulder, and her hair was damp and loose, hanging in dark waves around her face. She'd scrubbed off all her makeup, revealing the paleness of her skin, the faint freckles across her nose that cosmetics usually hid. She looked real, completely, beautifully real. I look ridiculous, she said, but she was smiling. You look perfect, Ethan replied honestly. Tea? Coffee? I think I have hot chocolate somewhere. Tea would be great. Vivian moved to the couch, curling up in one corner with the throw blanket pulled around her shoulders. This is the most comfortable I've been all night, maybe all year. Ethan made tea, finding the good cups that Maya had insisted they buy, mismatched ceramic mugs with various animals painted on them. He brought them to the couch, handing Vivian the one with a dog, and settled beside her, careful to leave space but close enough that their knees almost touched. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, warming their hands on the mugs, listening to the wind howl outside. The apartment was quiet except for the hiss of the radiator and the occasional creak of old pipes. It was nothing like the elegant silence of expensive hotels or luxury penthouses. It was the silence of a real home, lived in and imperfect. Thank you, Vivian said finally, her voice soft. For tonight. For all of it. For defending me, for believing me, for bringing me here instead of letting me run back to my empty penthouse. You don't need to thank me. I do, though, because you didn't have to do any of this. You could have left after Harrison exposed my manipulation. You could have taken your car and gone home and written the whole night off as a bizarre experience with your CEO. But you stayed. She set down her mug and turned to face him fully. Why did you stay? Ethan considered the question, considered all the easy answers he could give. Instead, he told her the truth. Because when I looked at you, I saw myself 3 years ago, standing at Sarah's funeral, holding Maya's hand, completely shattered, but trying to hold it together because everyone was watching. And I remembered how alone I felt, how desperately I needed someone to see past the performance and recognize that I was drowning. So when I saw you breaking down in your office tonight, when you asked for help, I couldn't walk away because someone did that for me once, and it saved my life. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Who was it? Who saved you? Sarah's sister, Elizabeth. She showed up at my apartment 2 weeks after the funeral and found me sitting in the dark because I'd forgotten to pay the electric bill. I was barely functional, barely eating, and Maya was staying with her grandparents because I couldn't take care of myself, let alone a 5-year-old. Ethan's throat tightened with the memory. Elizabeth didn't judge me. She didn't tell me to pull myself together or remind me that Maya needed me. She just sat with me in the dark and said it was okay to be broken. That being broken didn't make me a failure. And then she helped me put the pieces back together, one day at a time. Where is she now? Seattle. She moved out there for work 2 years ago. We don't talk as much as we should, but I think about her every time I'm tempted to judge someone for struggling. She taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. Vivian reached out and took his hand, her fingers cool and slightly trembling. I've never admitted I need help. Not once in my entire life. I've built everything on the foundation of being completely self-sufficient, of never depending on anyone for anything. And how's that working out for you? She laughed, but it came out more like a sob. Terribly. I'm successful and accomplished and absolutely miserable. I have everything money can buy and nothing that actually matters. And tonight, standing in that ballroom surrounded by family who barely knows me and a man who thinks he still loves me, I realized I'm going to die alone if I don't change something fundamental about how I live. You're not going to die alone, Ethan said firmly. How do you know? Because you're here. Because you walked away from the wedding, from Harrison's offer of an easier life, from your mother's expectations. Because you chose to be real with me instead of hiding behind your armor. That's not the choice someone makes when they've given up on connection. Vivian set down her mug and shifted closer, eliminating the careful space between them. She rested her head on his shoulder, and Ethan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her against his side. They fit together surprisingly well, her smaller frame tucking perfectly into the curve of his body. What happens tomorrow? She asked quietly. When the storm clears and we have to go back to being CEO and employee? When reality sets in and we remember that this is complicated and probably impossible? I don't know, Ethan admitted, but I know I don't want to pretend tonight didn't happen. I don't want to go back to passing each other in hallways and acting like we're strangers. We could get in serious trouble. The company has policies about relationships between executives and employees. The board would have opinions. There would be gossip and speculation and people questioning my judgment. Is that what you're worried about? What people will think? Vivian was quiet for a moment. No, I'm worried that I'll mess this up, that I'll choose work over you at the worst possible moment, or cancel plans because of an emergency that isn't really an emergency, or slowly push you away because I don't know how to let someone all the way in. I'm worried that Harrison was right, and I'm fundamentally incapable of putting a relationship first. Then don't put it first, Ethan said, and felt her shift in surprise. I'm not asking you to choose between your company and me, Vivian. I'm not asking you to be someone different or want different things. I'm just asking you to make room for this, to let me be part of your life instead of treating me like a competing priority. I don't know if I know how to do that. Then we'll figure it out together. Same way we're figuring out everything else. One day at a time, one conversation at a time, one honest moment at a time. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I'm not Harrison. I'm not going to give you an ultimatum or demand you prove your feelings by sacrificing your career, but I'm going to push back when you use work as an excuse to avoid dealing with emotions. And I'm going to call you on it when you start retreating behind your CEO persona instead of being real with me. Vivian tilted her head back to look at him, her storm-colored eyes searching his face. You're going to be exhausting to date, aren't you? Probably. You're going to be pretty challenging yourself. We're going to drive each other crazy. Absolutely. And it's still worth trying? Definitely. Ethan cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. Because the alternative is walking away from something that could be amazing just because we're afraid it might be hard, and I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions for me. Vivian closed the distance between them, kissing him with a tenderness that made his chest ache. It was different from the desperate kisses on the terrace or in the hotel hallway. This was softer, slower, a promise instead of a question. When they broke apart, she was smiling, and it reached all the way to her eyes. Stay tonight, Ethan said. Not because of the storm or because you don't have anywhere else to go. Stay because you want to, because you're choosing this, choosing us. I want to stay, Vivian said simply, more than I've wanted anything in a very long time. They moved to Ethan's bedroom, the small space made smaller by the presence of both of them, but somehow feeling exactly right. He gave her the side of the bed that Sarah used to sleep on, the side that had been empty for 3 years. And when Vivian slipped under the covers with a sigh of contentment, something in his chest that had been locked tight finally loosened. They lay facing each other in the dark, close enough to touch, but not quite touching, just existing in the same space without performance or pretense. Tell me about Sarah, Vivian said softly. If you want to. If it's not too painful. But Ethan was surprised to find that it wasn't painful, or at least not in the sharp, cutting way it used to be. She was brilliant. A teacher, elementary school, 3rd grade. She loved it so much that she'd come home every day with stories about her students, about their questions and their humor and their struggles. She made everything feel possible, even when things were hard, even when we were broke and stressed and had no idea what we were doing. How did she die? Car accident, black ice on the highway, some guy texting instead of watching the road. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. 1 minute I had a wife and Maya had a mother, and the next minute everything was just over. Vivian reached out and found his hand in the darkness, lacing their fingers together. I'm so sorry. The worst part was knowing she'd never see Maya grow up, never see her graduate or fall in love, or become whatever amazing thing she's going to be. Sarah was such a good mother, and Maya was robbed of that, and I've spent 3 years trying to be enough for both of us and knowing I'm failing. You're not failing, Vivian said firmly. You're showing up every day and loving your daughter and doing your best. That's not failure, that's heroism. Ethan squeezed her hand, grateful for the darkness that hid the tears in his eyes. I'm terrified of letting someone else in, of giving Maya another person to love who might leave, of letting myself care about someone enough that losing them would break me all over again. I know, I'm terrified too, just for different reasons. Vivian shifted closer until her forehead was resting against his chest. But maybe being terrified together is better than being safely alone. Maybe it is. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, breathing synchronized, two broken people finding comfort in each other's brokenness. Outside, the storm continued to rage, blanketing the city in white. But inside Ethan's small apartment, everything was warm and quiet, and for the first time in years, full of possibility. When Ethan woke in the morning, gray winter light was filtering through the curtains, and Vivian was still asleep beside him, her face peaceful in a way he hadn't seen when she was awake. He watched her for a moment, this powerful woman who ran a billion-dollar empire, but slept curled on her side like a child seeking comfort. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he carefully reached for it, trying not to wake her. 3 missed calls from Maya's friend's mother, probably wondering if he'd be able to pick Maya up given the storm. 2 texts from colleagues asking if the office would be open, and 1 email notification from Sterling Technologies HR that made his stomach drop. The subject line read, "Required disclosure of personal relationships." Ethan stared at the email, reality crashing back in with uncomfortable force. They had to disclose their relationship to HR. There would be meetings, paperwork, probably a transfer to a different department to avoid conflicts of interest. The entire company would know within days, and the speculation and gossip would be intense. This was real. This had real consequences. What's wrong? Vivian's voice was rough with sleep. She'd woken while he was staring at his phone, and now she was looking at him with concern. HR sent an email about relationship disclosure policies. He showed her the screen. I think someone from the wedding must have contacted them already. Or maybe your mother did. Either way, this is going to get complicated very quickly. Vivian sat up, running her hands through her tangled hair, and he watched as the CEO started to reassemble herself even without her armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup. Let me handle it. I'll talk to HR myself, explain the situation, make sure you're protected from any fallout. Vivian, I'm serious. This is my company, my reputation on the line. I'm not going to let you take the hit for something I initiated. She reached for her phone, which was sitting on the dresser, its battery long dead. Can I use your charger? You're going to call them right now? It's barely 7 in the morning. I'm the CEO. I call whenever I want. But she paused, looking at him with uncertainty that seemed at odds with her decisive words. Unless you think we should wait, talk about how we want to handle this before we make it official. Ethan set down his phone and took her hands, pulling her attention fully to him. Do you want this to be official? Do you want to actually try to make this work, knowing it's going to be complicated and messy and subject to intense scrutiny? Vivian met his eyes, and he saw the fear there, the vulnerability, but also something else. Determination, hope, the courage to choose something real despite the risks. Yes, she said. I want to try. I want to figure out how to be with you while still being who I am. I want to learn how to make room for this in my life instead of treating it like another item on my to-do list. And I want to face whatever comes next together instead of hiding or pretending this was just one crazy night. Relief flooded through Ethan, warm and overwhelming. Okay then. We'll call HR. We'll fill out the paperwork. We'll deal with the gossip and the questions and whatever else comes our way, together. Vivian smiled, and it was the same bright, genuine smile from the night before, the one that transformed her entire face. Together, she agreed. She kissed him then, and it felt like sealing a promise, like choosing to be brave even when everything in them screamed to retreat to safety. When they broke apart, Vivian was laughing. shaking her head in disbelief. I cannot believe I'm dating someone who works for me. My mother is going to have an aneurysm. The board is going to question my judgment. Harrison is going to have a field day with his told you so speeches. Do you care? Vivian considered the question seriously. Honestly, not as much as I thought I would. I spent so long caring what everyone thought, building my entire life around external validation and approval. And it made me successful but miserable. So maybe it's time to try caring more about what I want and less about what everyone else thinks I should want. That's a radical concept for a Sterling, Ethan observed. Revolutionary, even. She stood, stretching, and Ethan was struck again by how different she looked in his old t-shirt and sweatpants, how much younger and freer than the polished executive who had appeared on magazine covers. I should probably go home, change into something appropriate, and prepare for the war I'm about to start with my family and my board of directors. Or, Ethan suggested, you could stay for breakfast. I make pretty good pancakes and Maya's not being picked up until noon. We could just be normal for a few more hours before we have to face reality. Vivian's expression softened. Normal sounds perfect. They made breakfast together in Ethan's tiny kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing as they navigated the limited space. Vivian turned out to be terrible at cooking, burning the first batch of pancakes so thoroughly that they had to open windows despite the cold. But she was also curious and willing to learn, asking questions about technique and timing with the same intensity she probably brought to boardroom negotiations. As they sat at Ethan's small table eating slightly lopsided pancakes and drinking coffee from Maya's animal mugs, Vivian looked around the apartment with an expression that was wistful and content at the same time. I want this, she said quietly. Not just you, this. The normalcy, the simplicity, the feeling of actually living instead of just existing. I want to know what it feels like to make breakfast with someone and burn the pancakes and laugh about it instead of treating every meal like a business meeting or a social obligation. You can have it, Ethan said. It's not exclusive to people who live in small apartments and drive old cars. You just have to decide it's worth making space for in your life. I know, and that's the hard part, isn't it? Actually changing instead of just wanting to change. Vivian reached across the table and took his hand. But I'm going to try. For real this time. Not because you're asking me to, or because I'm trying to prove something to Harrison or my family. Because I want my life to feel like this feels. Like I'm actually present in it, instead of watching it happen from a distance. Ethan squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of her commitment, the genuine desire for transformation. I'll help however I can, but you have to do the work yourself. I can't fix you, and you can't fix me. We can just support each other while we both figure out how to be better versions of ourselves. Deal. Vivian smiled, then glanced at the clock on the wall. I really should go, though. I need to shower, change, and prepare for the calls I'm going to have to make. My mother is probably already mobilizing her forces. They cleaned up together, and then Ethan called a car service while Vivian changed back into her dress from the night before, the expensive fabric now wrinkled and spotted with snow stains. She emerged from the bathroom looking like exactly what she was, someone doing the walk of shame from a night that had changed everything. I look like a disaster, she said, but she was smiling. You look like someone who chose to be real instead of perfect. I'd say that's an improvement. The car arrived and Ethan walked her down to the lobby, neither of them wanting to let go, but knowing they had to face their separate realities before they could build something together. On the snowy sidewalk, with morning light making everything look clean and new, Vivian turned to him one last time. I'm scared, she admitted, that this was just one perfect night, and reality is going to crush it. That I'm going to disappoint you, or mess this up, or prove that I really am as broken as everyone thinks. Then we'll deal with it, Ethan said. One day at a time, no grand promises, just honest effort and genuine care, and the willingness to keep trying even when it gets hard. One day at a time, Vivian repeated, and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Then she was sliding into the back of the car, and Ethan was standing on the sidewalk watching her drive away, the taillights disappearing around the corner. He stood there for a moment in the cold, snow still falling lightly, and realized that everything had changed. Last night, he had been Ethan Cole, single father and mid-level analyst whose life was defined by careful boundaries and controlled risks. Now he was Ethan Cole, the man dating Vivian Sterling, and he had no idea what that was going to mean for his job, his daughter, his carefully constructed existence. But as he climbed back up the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment, he found he didn't care about the uncertainty. For the first time in 3 years, he felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with just surviving. He felt like he was actually living, taking risks, choosing possibility over safety. And that, he thought as he started preparing to pick up Maya and explain why her father's CEO was probably going to be around more often, felt like exactly what he needed. The call from Catherine Sterling came at exactly 9:30 Monday morning, 3 days after the wedding, and Ethan knew before answering that it wasn't going to be pleasant. He was at his desk on the 42nd floor, trying to focus on market projections while fielding curious glances from colleagues who had clearly heard something about the weekend but weren't quite sure what to believe. "Mr. Cole?" Catherine's voice was ice over steel. "I believe we need to have a conversation. I'm in the building, conference room B on the executive floor, 10 minutes. The line went dead before he could respond. Ethan sat staring at his phone, his stomach knotting with anxiety. He hadn't spoken to Vivian since she'd left his apartment Saturday morning, though they'd exchanged texts throughout the weekend. She'd warned him that her mother was furious, that the family was in an uproar, that the board had requested an emergency meeting to discuss concerns about leadership judgment. But she'd also said she was handling it, that he shouldn't worry, that everything would be fine. Somehow Ethan doubted Catherine Sterling had come all the way to the office just to tell him everything was fine. He took the elevator to the executive floor, his reflection in the polished doors showing a man who looked far more nervous than he wanted to feel. The executive corridor was quiet, elegant, completely unlike the bustling floor he'd just left. Conference room B was at the end of the hall, all glass walls and minimalist furniture, designed for high-stakes negotiations and difficult conversations. Catherine was already inside, standing at the window with her back to the door, her posture perfect even in stillness. She didn't turn when Ethan entered, didn't acknowledge his presence for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and cold. "Close the door, Mr. Cole." He did, the soft click seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Catherine turned to face him, and he saw that her composure was absolute. No trace of the anger she must be feeling visible in her expression. She was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than his monthly salary, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, the same storm-colored eyes as Vivian's, were evaluating him with ruthless precision. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the conference table. Ethan sat, keeping his expression neutral even as his heart hammered against his ribs. Catherine took the seat across from him, folding her hands on the table with deliberate care. "I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Cole, because I don't believe in wasting time with pleasantries when serious matters are at stake. You have inserted yourself into my daughter's life at what I can only describe as an extremely vulnerable moment, and I need to understand your intentions. With all due respect, Mrs. Sterling, I didn't insert myself into anything. Vivian asked for my help, and I gave it. What's developed between us since then has been mutual." "Has it?" Catherine's eyebrow arched fractionally. "Or have you seen an opportunity to advance your career by attaching yourself to the CEO? It wouldn't be the first time an ambitious employee has attempted to use a personal relationship for professional gain." Anger flared hot in Ethan's chest, but he kept his voice level. "I'm not ambitious. I'm a mid-level analyst who's perfectly content with his career trajectory. I didn't pursue Vivian. I didn't scheme to get close to her. She was crying in her office, and I tried to help. That's all. And yet here you are, 3 days later, the subject of company-wide gossip and board-level concern. Your name is attached to my daughter's in a way that affects not just her personal reputation, but the reputation of this entire company." Catherine leaned forward slightly. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The position you've put her in?" "I know exactly what position she's in. She's in the position of trying to have a personal life while running a billion-dollar company, and apparently that's threatening to people who prefer she remain isolated and completely devoted to Sterling Technologies." Catherine's expression hardened. "You think you understand my daughter after one weekend? You think you know what's best for her company, for her future? I think I know that she's been miserable for years, and everyone around her has been too focused on stock prices and quarterly earnings to notice or care. I think I know that she deserves to be happy, not just successful, And I think I know that she's terrified of letting anyone in because every relationship in her life has been conditional on her performance and achievement. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and accusatory. Catherine's jaw tightened, the first crack in her composed facade, but when she spoke, her voice remained controlled. You presume to judge my parenting? You presume to know what my daughter needs better than I do? I presume nothing. I'm just telling you what I see. And what I see is a brilliant woman who spent her entire life being told her worth is tied to her professional success, and who's internalized that message so deeply she doesn't know how to value herself outside of her achievements. Catherine was silent for a long moment, and Ethan braced himself for the explosion. But when it came, it wasn't fury. It was something colder and more calculated. Let me tell you what I see, Mr. Cole. I see a widower with a young daughter, struggling financially despite working at one of the most lucrative companies in Boston. I see someone whose career has been stagnant for years, who hasn't been promoted despite adequate performance. I see someone who, with a relationship to the CEO, might suddenly find doors opening that were previously closed. Ethan felt his blood run cold. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. And here's another fact. If you continue this relationship with my daughter, your life at Sterling Technologies will become extremely difficult. Not because I'll interfere directly. I don't need to. The board is already concerned. Your colleagues are already talking. HR is watching every interaction you have with Vivian for signs of impropriety or preferential treatment. You'll be under a microscope, and any mistake, any slip in judgment will be magnified and used as evidence that this relationship is damaging to the company. Then I'll transfer to another department or another company entirely. And support your daughter on what? The salary you'd get elsewhere? Catherine's smile was thin and cruel. You're good at your job, Mr. Cole, but you're not exceptional. You're not going to command the same compensation package at another firm. And I imagine changing schools, moving to a different neighborhood, disrupting Maya's life, that would be difficult for both of you. The mention of his daughter's name made something snap inside Ethan. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Don't you dare bring my daughter into this. She has nothing to do with any of this. She has everything to do with it. Because you're a father first, which means you'll always put her needs above my daughter's. Which means Vivian will always be second priority to you, just as she was with Harrison, just as she's been with every man who's claimed to care about her. The only difference is that you'll dress it up in noble language about protecting your child, when really you're just another man who can't handle being with a woman more successful than yourself. You're wrong, Ethan said quietly, but his hands were shaking. I'm not Harrison. I'm not intimidated by Vivian's success. And yes, Maya is my priority. She has to be. She's 8 years old and she lost her mother. But that doesn't mean I can't make room for Vivian in our lives. It doesn't mean I can't care about both of them. Can't you? Catherine stood as well, moving around the table toward him. What happens when Vivian has to work late and you promised Maya you'd be at her school play? What happens when there's a crisis at the company and Vivian needs to fly to Singapore for a week, but Maya has the flu? What happens when you have to choose, Mr. Cole? Because you will have to choose, eventually. And when you do, my daughter will be the one who gets hurt. Again. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that it wouldn't come to that they could find balance. But the truth was, Catherine was articulating fears he'd been trying to ignore since Saturday morning. The logistics of combining his life with Vivian's seemed impossible when he actually thought them through. Different worlds, different priorities, different everything. I see you're beginning to understand, Catherine said, reading his expression with devastating accuracy. You care about her. I can see that. And perhaps you genuinely believe this can work. But caring isn't enough, Mr. Cole. Love isn't enough when the practical realities make a relationship unsustainable. You'll hurt each other trying to make it work, and in the end, you'll both be worse off than you were before. Before Ethan could respond, the conference room door opened and Vivian strode in, her expression thunderous. She was in full CEO mode. Immaculate black suit, hair pulled back severely, every inch the powerful executive, but her eyes were blazing with fury. Mother, what the hell do you think you're doing? Catherine turned calmly, as if she'd been expecting this interruption. Having a conversation with Mr. Cole about the complications of your relationship. Someone needs to think practically about this situation. You mean someone needs to try to control my life because you can't stand that I made a choice you didn't approve? Vivian moved to stand beside Ethan, her presence both reassuring and intensifying the tension in the room. Get out of my building now. Vivian, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm being perfectly reasonable when I tell you that if you ever threaten someone I care about again, if you ever use your position or your influence to try to manipulate my personal life, you will regret it. I am the CEO of this company, not you. I make the decisions about who I see and how I live my life. And if you can't respect that, then we have nothing more to say to each other. The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine stared at her daughter, something flickering in her eyes that might have been surprise or hurt or grudging respect. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. And at least I'll be making it because I chose something I wanted, not because I let fear or family expectations dictate my choices. Vivian's voice softened slightly. I love you, Mother, but I'm done letting you run my life. I'm done prioritizing your approval over my own happiness. So either accept that I'm going to make my own decisions, or step back and let me figure it out without your interference. Catherine looked between them, her composure finally cracking enough to show the conflict beneath. For a moment, Ethan thought she might say something cutting, something designed to wound. Instead, she simply nodded once, collected her purse, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, not turning back. I hope you're right, Vivian. I hope he's worth it. Then she was gone, leaving Vivian and Ethan alone in the too quiet conference room. Vivian closed her eyes and took a deep breath, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Are you okay? Ethan asked quietly. No, I'm furious and shaking and absolutely terrified. I just burned the last bridge to my family. She opened her eyes and looked at him. But I'm also more sure of this than I've ever been of anything. She had no right to threaten you. She had no right to use Maya as leverage or to try to make you doubt this relationship. She wasn't entirely wrong, though, Ethan admitted, about the complications, about the practical realities of trying to make this work. Vivian's expression shifted to something vulnerable. Are you having second thoughts? I'm having realistic thoughts. Your mother raised legitimate concerns about logistics and priorities, and how we're going to navigate two very different lives with very different demands. So what are you saying? Ethan moved closer, taking her hands in his. I'm saying we need to have an honest conversation about what this actually looks like. Not the romantic version where everything works out perfectly, but the real version where we have to figure out schedules and boundaries and how to protect Maya while still making room for us. Vivian nodded slowly, relief crossing her features. You're right. We've been avoiding the practical details because we're caught up in the emotion of it all. We need to actually plan. They sat down at the conference table, and for the next hour they talked through logistics with the same analytical precision Vivian probably brought to business negotiations. Ethan explained his responsibilities to Maya: school pickups, homework help, bedtime routines, weekend activities. Vivian outlined her work schedule: early mornings, late evenings, frequent travel, emergency situations that could arise at any time. It became clear very quickly that making this work would require compromise from both of them. I can't ask you to change your schedule for Maya, Ethan said. That's not fair to you or realistic for your position. And I can't ask you to deprioritize your daughter, Vivian countered. That would make me exactly the kind of person I don't want to be. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of impossibility pressing down on them. Then Vivian said quietly, what if we stopped thinking about it as choosing between priorities and started thinking about it as integrating our lives? What if instead of you making room for me or me making room for you, we built something new that had space for both Maya and my work and us? How would that work? I don't know yet, but I'm willing to figure it out if you are. Vivian squeezed his hands. I could adjust my schedule to have dinner with you and Maya a few nights a week. I could plan my travel around her school calendar when possible. I could actually use the flexibility I theoretically have as CEO instead of treating my company like it will collapse if I'm not available 24/7. And I could find better childcare, so I'm not always on such a tight schedule, Ethan offered. Maya's grandparents have been asking to spend more time with her. I could accept their help instead of being so determined to do everything myself. I could be more flexible about work hours since you're the CEO and probably won't fire me for adjusting my schedule. Vivian almost smiled at that. No, I probably won't fire you, though I will need to transfer you to a different department to avoid any appearance of impropriety. HR has been very clear about that. I'm fine with a transfer, as long as it doesn't involve a pay cut that would hurt Maya's stability. It won't. I'll make sure of it. Vivian paused, then added quietly, I want to meet her. Maya. Not right away. I know that's too soon and too much pressure. But eventually. If we're going to do this for real, I want to be part of your whole life, not just the parts that are convenient. Ethan felt his chest tighten with emotion. She'll like you. Once she gets past the initial suspicion that you're trying to replace her mother, which will probably take a few months of careful relationship building. I would never try to replace Sarah. I couldn't if I wanted to. I know, but Maya's 8, and 8-year-olds think in absolutes. Any woman in my life is automatically a threat to her mother's memory. We'll have to go slow. Let her set the pace. I can do slow. I'm not good at it, but I can learn. Vivian looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. I want to learn all of this, Ethan. How to be part of a family, how to prioritize people over profits, how to actually live instead of just achieving. I want to figure it out with you. Even if it's messy and complicated and nothing like the controlled environment you're used to. Especially then, because my controlled environment has made me miserable, and your messy, complicated life has more warmth and realness in it than my entire existence up until now. They sealed the commitment with a kiss, and when they broke apart, Ethan felt something settle in his chest. This wasn't going to be easy. There would be conflicts and compromises and moments when they both wanted to retreat to the safety of their separate lives. But they were choosing to try anyway, and that felt like the bravest thing either of them had done in years. The next few weeks unfolded with a mixture of chaos and unexpected grace. The board meeting about Vivian's relationship went as badly as expected. Several members questioned her judgment, raised concerns about company reputation, suggested that perhaps she should step back from day-to-day operations if her personal life was becoming a distraction. Vivian had listened to their concerns with icy composure, then systematically dismantled every argument with data showing that her leadership had delivered unprecedented growth and that her personal life had zero impact on her performance. The company doesn't own me, she told them, her voice cutting through the boardroom with steel precision. You hired me to run Sterling Technologies, and I've exceeded every metric you set. My personal relationships are not subject to committee approval. If you disagree with that, you're welcome to call for a vote of no confidence. Otherwise, this discussion is over. No one had called for a vote. The gossip at work was exactly as uncomfortable as predicted. Ethan was transferred to the investment strategy division on a different floor, which helped somewhat, but people still whispered when they saw him and Vivian together in the elevator or leaving the building at the same time. Some of the comments were cruel, gold digger, opportunist, riding her coattails. Others were merely curious, wondering how a nobody analyst had managed to catch the attention of Vivian Sterling. Ethan learned to ignore most of it, though there were days when the scrutiny felt suffocating. Vivian had it worse. The tech blogs and business media picked up the story, spinning it into everything from a romantic fairy tale to a cautionary tale about female executives letting emotion cloud judgment. She endured it with the same fierce composure she brought to everything, though Ethan could see the toll it took in the tightness around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. Through it all, they kept their promise to each other. One day at a time, one conversation at a time, one honest moment at a time. The first time Vivian came to dinner at Ethan's apartment, Maya had been suspicious and slightly hostile, asking pointed questions about why Daddy's boss was eating with them and whether this meant Daddy was going to get fired. Vivian had handled it with surprising grace, answering Maya's questions honestly and not trying too hard to win her over. I like your dad, she'd told Maya simply, and I'm hoping we can be friends too. But I understand if you need time to get used to me being around. Do you know anything about dogs? Maya had asked, her 8-year-old logic determining that this was the most important qualification for spending time with her family. Not much, Vivian had admitted, but I'm willing to learn if you're willing to teach me. It wasn't a perfect beginning, but it was honest, and over the following weeks, Maya had slowly warmed to Vivian's presence. She'd tested boundaries, asked impossible questions, made demands designed to see if Vivian would stick around when things got difficult. And Vivian had surprised them both by staying, by showing up when she said she would, by learning to braid hair and help with homework, and listen to 8-year-old concerns with the same focused attention she gave to billion-dollar deals. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after the wedding, on a Saturday when Ethan had to work an emergency half-day to deal with a client crisis. Vivian had volunteered to stay with Maya, and Ethan had left them together with some trepidation, worried about what he might come home to. What he came home to was Vivian and Maya sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by dog care books from the library, planning out exactly what kind of dog they should adopt and what supplies they would need. Maya was explaining with great seriousness that golden retrievers were the best dogs in the entire world, and Vivian was taking notes on her phone like they were discussing market strategy. "We're getting a dog," Maya had announced when she saw him. "Vivian says it's important for kids to learn responsibility, and dogs teach empathy and routine. Also, they're fluffy, and I love them." Ethan had looked at Vivian, who'd shrugged with a small smile. "I might have gotten carried away." But she made a very compelling argument about the developmental benefits of pet ownership. They'd adopted a golden retriever puppy 2 weeks later, a bundle of chaotic energy that Maya named Princess Buttercup, and that proceeded to destroy 3 pairs of Vivian's designer shoes before learning that shoes were not food. Vivian had laughed about it, genuinely laughed, and Ethan had realized with stunning clarity that she was learning to let go of control, to embrace chaos, to find joy in the mess of real life. But it wasn't all smooth progress. There were hard moments, too. The night Vivian had to cancel dinner because of a board emergency, and Maya had cried, convinced that Vivian was leaving just like everyone else eventually left. The weekend when Ethan had to take Maya to her grandparents and Vivian had admitted she felt jealous and excluded, like she was on the outside of their family looking in. The argument they'd had about work-life balance when Vivian had worked through 3 consecutive date nights and Ethan had finally snapped that he needed her to actually be present when they were together. They'd worked through each crisis by talking, by being honest, even when honesty was uncomfortable, by choosing each other again and again, even when it would have been easier to retreat. 3 months after the wedding, Vivian showed up at Ethan's apartment with a strange expression on her face and a folder in her hands. "I did something," she said without preamble, "and I need to know if I overstepped." She handed him the folder. Inside were documents transferring ownership of a brownstone in Cambridge, a beautiful 3-story building with a small backyard and enough space for a family. The deed was in Ethan's name, fully paid, no mortgage. Ethan stared at the papers, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Vivian, what is this?" "It's a house, for you and Maya, and me, if you want me there. But primarily for you because you've been talking about wanting to give Maya a real home with a yard and room to grow, and I have the resources to make that happen, so I did." The words tumbled out in a rush. "But now I'm realizing this might be too much, too presumptuous, too controlling, and if you want me to undo it, I will. I just thought—" Ethan set down the folder and pulled her into his arms, cutting off her anxious rambling. "It's too much," he said quietly against her hair. "Way too much. This is $1 million property, Vivian. I can't accept this." He felt her tense against him. "Because your pride won't let you accept help from someone who has more money than you? Because you need to be the provider and this threatens your masculine identity?" "No, because a house is a huge decision that we should make together, not something you should buy unilaterally because you have the resources. Because I don't want you solving problems with money that we should solve with conversation. Because as much as I appreciate the gesture, I need us to be partners in this relationship, not benefactor in charity case." Vivian pulled back to look at him, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, you're right. I saw a problem, and I tried to fix it the way I fix everything, by throwing resources at it. I didn't stop to think about how it would make you feel or whether you'd even want this particular solution. I love that you want to help. I love that you're thinking about our future and trying to make our lives better, but I need you to include me in decisions that affect me and Maya. I need to feel like we're building this together instead of you building it for us." "How do I do that?" Vivian asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "How do I help without taking over? How do I contribute without making you feel like I'm trying to control everything?" "You ask. You say, 'I've been thinking about housing options. Can we talk about it?' instead of showing up with a signed deed. You share the decision-making instead of making decisions and presenting them as done deals. Vivian nodded slowly, absorbing this. I can do that. I want to do that. But I might mess it up sometimes because I'm so used to just making things happen. And I'll mess up sometimes too by being too proud to accept help when I actually need it. We'll both mess up and then we'll talk about it and do better next time. They returned the deed, but the conversation it sparked led to a joint decision to look for a house together, something they could both afford and both choose. It took 2 months of searching, but they found a place in Newton, smaller than the brownstone Vivian had bought, but warm and full of potential. They closed on it together, both their names on the deed, both of them contributing according to their means but sharing the decision equally. The night they got the keys, they stood in the empty living room with Maya running through the unfurnished rooms above them, her excited shouts echoing off bare walls. "This is real, isn't it?" Vivian said quietly, her hand in Ethan's. "We're actually doing this, building a life together." "We're doing it," Ethan confirmed, messily, imperfectly, but we're doing it. "I'm terrified," Vivian admitted. "Every day I wake up convinced I'm going to mess this up, that I'm going to hurt you or disappoint Maya or prove that I'm exactly as incapable of real relationships as everyone has always said. And every day you show up anyway. That's what matters. Not being perfect, but being present." Ethan turned to face her fully. "I love you, Vivian Sterling. I love your brilliance and your determination and the way you're learning to be vulnerable, even though it scares you. I love how you take notes when Maya explains dog behavior, and how you've learned to make pancakes without burning them, and how you fight for us even when it would be easier to give up." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. I love your patience and your kindness and the way you see me as more than just my achievements. I love how you're teaching me that being strong doesn't mean being alone, and that asking for help isn't weakness. I love the life we're building together, even though it's nothing like what I thought I wanted." They kissed in their new empty house, while above them Maya called down to ask if she could paint her room purple, and Princess Buttercup barked at nothing in the small backyard. And Ethan thought about that snowy night 6 months ago when he'd found Vivian crying in her office, when he'd agreed to help a stranger with no idea it would change his entire life. The wedding invitation arrived in spring, 8 months after Emma's wedding, and this time Vivian didn't need armor or a fake boyfriend or any pretense at all. She and Ethan attended as a real couple, bringing Maya along because the invitation had included her by name. Emma greeted them with delight, pulling Vivian into a hug and whispering something that made her laugh. Catherine was there too, and the relationship between mother and daughter remained complicated and tense. But they were talking, slowly rebuilding something from the rubble of confrontation and ultimatums. Catherine had apologized, stiffly and formally, for threatening Ethan. Vivian had accepted the apology but made clear that boundaries would remain in place. It wasn't perfect reconciliation, but it was honest, and that was more than they'd had before. Harrison appeared at one point, drink in hand, his expression carefully neutral. He approached their table with the air of someone who'd been debating whether to do this all evening. "Vivian," he said, "you look happy." "I am happy," she replied simply. "Good. That's good." He glanced at Ethan, then at Maya, who was focused on folding her napkin into elaborate shapes. "I was wrong. About a lot of things. You weren't incapable of relationship. You just needed someone who accepted you instead of trying to change you." "Thank you for saying that," Vivian said, and her voice was gentle, free of the anger that had been there months ago. "I hope you find that too. Someone who sees you and chooses you exactly as you are." Harrison smiled, sad but genuine, and walked away. Ethan watched him go, feeling something that might have been pity. Harrison had loved Vivian in his way, but he'd loved the idea of her more than the reality. He'd wanted the polished version, the one that fit neatly into his vision of a perfect life. He'd never been willing to embrace the messy, complicated, beautifully imperfect truth of who she actually was. That night, after they'd put Maya to bed in her new purple bedroom with Princess Buttercup sprawled across her feet, Ethan and Vivian stood on the back porch of their new house, watching spring stars emerge in the clearing sky. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly. "For what?" "For staying that night, for seeing me when I was broken and choosing to care anyway. For believing I could change and holding me accountable when I tried to hide behind old patterns. For building this life with me, even though it's been hard and scary and nothing like either of us expected. Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her against his chest. Thank you for being brave enough to ask for help. For letting me in, even though everything in you screamed to keep the walls up. For loving my daughter and learning to be part of our family. For choosing this messy, complicated, imperfect life with me. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other in the spring darkness, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling into sleep. Somewhere inside, Maya called out from a dream, and Vivian started to move, but Ethan stopped her. I'll get her, he said. You've got the early meeting tomorrow. We'll both go, Vivian decided. The meeting can wait 5 minutes. They went upstairs together, checking on Maya, who had already settled back into sleep, one arm around Princess Buttercup. They stood in the doorway watching her breathe, this small person who had accepted Vivian into their family with cautious hope and growing trust. She called me Vivian Mom yesterday, Vivian whispered. Not Mom, not replacing Sarah, just Vivian Mom, like I'm my own category of parent. How did that feel? Terrifying. Wonderful. Like I might actually be doing this right. She leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. I never thought I'd have this. A family. People who need me for reasons that have nothing to do with my bank account or my business acumen. People who love me just because I'm me. You have it now, Ethan said, for as long as you want it. Forever then, Vivian replied. I want it forever. They closed Maya's door quietly and walked to their own room, the master bedroom they'd painted together, arguing good-naturedly about whether the blue was too dark and whether they needed blackout curtains. It was full of compromises and shared decisions, evidence of two people learning to blend their lives. As they lay in bed together, Vivian's head on Ethan's chest, his fingers running through her hair, they talked about the future, about Maya's upcoming school play, and Vivian's presentation to the board next week, about the vacation they were planning, just the three of them and Princess Buttercup, about ordinary, everyday things that mattered because they were building them together. And Ethan thought about that snowy Boston night that felt like a lifetime ago, when he had stayed late at the office for the first time in months and heard someone crying behind frosted glass, when he had made a choice to help a stranger, not knowing it would lead him here, to this life, to this woman, to this unexpected family. He had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay when everything told you to run. That real love wasn't about perfection or control or meeting impossible standards. It was about seeing someone fully, brokenness and all, and choosing them anyway. It was about building something new from the pieces of broken things, creating beauty from the wreckage of what you thought your life should be. Vivian had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that letting people in didn't mean losing yourself. She had learned that success measured in spreadsheets and stock prices was hollow without people to share it with. She had learned to make pancakes and braid hair and be present in moments instead of always planning 3 steps ahead. They had both learned that love wasn't something you controlled or strategized or earned through achievement. It was something you chose every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Outside, spring rain began to fall, washing away the last traces of winter. Inside their new house, in their shared bed, Ethan and Vivian fell asleep wrapped around each other, Princess Buttercup snoring gently from Maya's room down the hall, the three of them, now 4, building a life that was messy and complicated and imperfectly perfect. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, they were both exactly where they wanted to be. The storm had passed, the walls had come down, and in the quiet spaces between what they'd been and what they were becoming, they had found each other. It was enough. It was everything. It was finally, beautifully enough.